We'll see if it actually works. It looks like it has. It's gone red, so I'll assume we're live from now. So today I am live with Ayden Linden, a fellow person on YouTube, where we're going to have a nice chat about politics and such. Ayden, I think you're in the States. I'm in the UK, so it's a bit of a cross-Atlantic conversation today, but ought to be an interesting one. How are you this morning? This afternoon, even. Sorry, Ayden.
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm very excited to be here, have this chat.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah, for sure. And welcome to everybody over on my side of the YouTube live stream discussion as well. Hope everybody's doing well over here as well. But yeah, thank you very much for having me on. This is a little bit impromptu, but definitely going to be a lot of fun, I think.
Yeah, well, fast times call for fast measures, I suppose. But yeah, I'm hoping it'll be fun as well. So I suppose I should give a little bit of a preamble. So I like to online see what's going on in the world, right? Like see not just from the massive accounts and the big names and such, but also just what the average person is thinking and doing. And so, as someone that, unfortunately, our environment is not in the best place. We've got a climate crisis going on. We've got a lot of things to contend with. Um, I like to pay attention to what is going on in sort of those sorts of circles. And so, Aiden's actually done some really good work recently, actually looking after the environment, just doing his little bit in his corner of the world, some cleanups, some litter picking and such. And I thought it'd be an interesting sort of thing to lead into a conversation with. So, firstly, Aiden, can I just sort of commend you for doing something worthwhile with your time? Because it's actually refreshing seeing that sort of stuff on my timeline and not like, I don't know, climate denial and stuff.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it's definitely a lot of hard work. A lot of people, they'll kind of just walk by and they'll see somebody just kind of picking up a little bit of garbage and assume, oh, it's not that big of a deal. But then, unfortunately, the vast majority of those people never bother to do it themselves, and to a certain extent, that's because it takes a little bit of effort to go out of your way and spend that time actually trying to deal with the issue instead of just pretending more or less that it isn't an issue at all. But yeah, I've been living in this neighborhood that I've been living in for about going on 4 years at this point. And over those 4 years, it's just gotten progressively worse as time has gone on. It's gotten more and more prevalent throughout the area. And at a certain point, it just became a matter of, well, am I actually going to do something about it, or am I just going to endlessly complain about the issues? So decided to start actually tackling it as a problem, and been making incremental progress here and there, but every little bit certainly helps. So yeah, that's kind of my fairly brief story that I've got so far with my trash collecting journey.
Well, no, I think it's really nice actually. Like, I think it's it's, as I said, commendable, but like it's an example of how sort of little actions together. Like, if more people felt like they could sort of just get involved and in their corner of the world, sort of start actually looking after it in a way, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of progress could be done, right? Because there's a lot of people, a lot of people working together can do a great deal of stuff to actually improve the state of our planet and such. And I suppose that's sort of what I wanted to lead into really. Like we exist at the moment in a world where the people in charge of our societies fundamentally just don't care, right? Like they either profit from fossil fuel usage or bulldozing national parks to put up like a car park or something, or they're believing in pseudoscience. They don't actively believe in climate change because they've been paid off to support and lobby for the fossil fuel industry and such. And so there's an interesting sort of question really of like how we as people not on that top tier political power level, where we're sort of just in society as an ordinary person, how do we what do we do in the face of this climate injustice? And so I suppose quite a big question, but I put it to you, Aiden, like where do you see the climate movement sort of needing to go? Or what do you think the future should be in terms of like what we can do? And
I
hello, some
think
Managee as well in the chat.
no problem. Yeah, so I think that there needs to kind of be a two-pronged approach. I think that on one hand, we need to be for lack of a better term, not being so lighthearted in some aspects. And I think one of the ways that we're a little bit lighthearted, so to speak, is we've been using the term climate change a lot. And while I agree with the term insofar as yes, it's accurate, the climate around us is changing. A lot of people hear the words climate change and they think, oh, well, the summer's a little bit warmer than it was last year, or oh, the winters are a little bit harsher than they were. They think of it as a small incremental kind of thing. I think we need to start terming it as climate collapse, because that is what is going on around us right now. It is not just a change, it is a collapse that is occurring over a decades-long process. And while I think that certainly can inject a lot of doom and gloom in a lot of people's minds and kind of almost get this impression that, oh, well, things are hopeless if we go on that route, I think that it needs to, on the other hand, also need to be a movement that emphasizes a lot more community action and emphasizes, while yes, the climate around us is collapsing, you as a person can do something about it. And while the impact that you have as an individual may not be gargantuan, so to speak, the efforts of you and the people within your community, when combined and put together and put in conjunction with even other people's communities, can make a very large difference. I think that when you look into a lot of the climate science and you look into a lot of the hard data associated with this current Holocene mass extinction event that we're going through right now, and the acidification of the oceans and the carbonization of the atmosphere, you find a lot of climate scientists almost downplaying the data that's being provided. And when you ask them, well, why are you downplaying it? It's because a lot of people get the sense that, well, if we actually are open and honest with people about how rapidly things are deteriorating, there will be this sense of hopelessness that will pervade within a lot of people. This sense of, oh, well, things are going that bad that quickly, well, I may as well not do anything. And I disagree fundamentally. I think it is that accelerationism that needs to be firmly planted into people's minds, because it is that idea that it is this other generation's problem, that it's this other group of people's problem down the line that I don't really have to worry about all that much. I think that is what is causing so many people to carelessly throw away their drink cup, or to not care about a giant pile of litter sitting in their neighborhood, because, well, is that really going to catch up to me in my lifetime? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And that needs to be put in people's minds, in addition to the idea that there is something that they can do about it. But sorry, that's a very long, meandering answer. Pardon me.
No, not at all. Not at all. I was quite enjoying it. I was using the opportunity to pull up a few things on my own screen because it was I actually brought up quite a lot of things which I was going to sort of lead into as well. I absolutely agree that climate change as a term is a little bit too gentle, too easy to sort of sit with, because as you said, right, like change could be explained away like, oh yeah, so it's a bit warmer this summer. Oh, it's maybe we haven't had as much rain this time. Maybe there's a bit of difference. I like the term climate crisis as well as that sort of climate collapse, because it tells you immediately that there is something fundamentally dangerous to our current way of life if we don't address what is happening right now. And I also think that it's important to, as you've just said, then connect it to the immediate as well as the long-term problems. Because as you listed, right, like ocean acidification, the unthawing of the large glaciers and ice sheets and such, the potential devastation in terms of biomedical health. The fact that lots of pathogens previously covered up and out of our way under the ice sheets and stuff are now being exposed to the climate, the devastating heat emergency deaths that are likely to be affecting us in the future. Like, there's loads of angles you can sort of look at with this. But as you say, it's a lot to comprehend. And so putting it on that local level is a good way of sort of letting people feel like they can have some agency and think, okay, the climate is a big thing, but on a small level, my local environment can be helped by me taking the time to actually sort of work with my community to handle our waste properly, or planning out how we're going to spend our time rather than sort of just acting impulsively and not thinking of the community.
Right.
And I think there's a critical sort of thing to add there, because I think that climate justice, certainly on the local level, needs to also be paired with economic justice. Like the person that I don't know, tosses their litter on the side of the road, doesn't care to find a bin for it, is doing so not just because, I'm sure if you ask them, they wouldn't say, yes, I hate the environment, I love
Right.
pollution. But they also, they're encouraged by many things in society to be lazy, to be not concerned with the long term thoughts and health of the planet and such, but what they immediately need to do now. People are pressed for
Right.
time through work, through school, through not having that actual pause in their life to sort of think about big things like climate change, climate
Right.
crisis. And so they're sort of led to decisions which aren't necessarily in their or the planet's best interest. And that's not to say that, oh yes, they watch TV too much and now just toss cups in the bin, miss the bin and such. But at the same time, the reason a lot of these people do these things isn't through some malice, but because they've not had the time to, as we're doing now, sort of sit and think about it, or they've not maybe got the flexibility to plan out their day in a way that's best suited to what is environmentally healthy and safe.
Right. And there was a gentleman in my side chat by the name of Morngo who said, but the impact of the people isn't anywhere near the impact of corporations. The corporations are the ones responsible for the climate change, to which I would reply, while the corporations certainly bear a much larger carbon footprint than any one individual, it's important to remember that while one of the major objectives of a corporation is to kind of depersonify individuals and allow individuals to make individual profit without individual responsibility, those corporations are still ultimately made up of other people. There are still a group of other people sitting on the board of shareholders and the board of trustees, and the CEO is still a person, right? All of these things are still being done by people. I agree that there are certain people who hold much more power and authority to do more about it, but as well, I think that it's important not to fall into what I call the China trap. Because how many people do you see out there in the world justifying the small carbon footprint they've created unnecessarily by saying, oh, well, look at the size of the carbon footprint of people in China, or India, or Bangladesh, or all of these other different places around the world. They try to obfuscate their own impact based off of what these other people are doing across the planet. And I would just say to those people that are trying to do that, well, you are not in control of whether or not somebody in China or Bangladesh or India is going to clean up their garbage or not. That's simply something that is not within your purview. You, however, do have control whether or not you are going to clean up your garbage, whether or not you are going to clean up after someone else's garbage, whether or not you are going to organize within your community and try to foster a larger movement of people who also want to clean up their garbage. It's an endless system where you can excuse your own actions and behaviors because someone else is doing it worse than you. And I just think that that's not a healthy mentality to have. I think that it's blame shifting. And I think that the world where corporations are discouraged from causing so much climatic destruction will be a world where the common man like you and me actually put pressure on them to do so. Because they're never going to change. They're never going to do anything differently if they're not incentivized to do so, either through whether it be through government action, forcing them into climatically sensible behavior, or whether it be through us boycotting them until they do so. I just think that the onus ultimately falls upon the individual, and that's so easy to lose track of in a world of over 8 billion people.
Interesting points. I think there's definitely what you just described there is absolutely something I've heard before, right? Like this idea that, oh, well, some obscure sort of abstracted China, Bangladesh, etc., is doing much worse than us, so we don't need to actually really engage with it. Or in particular, they don't want to think about it because they've created this totem almost in their minds to actually sidetrack the conversation to. But I've actually gone across to your channel to see these comments because I can't see them on my end. But I do agree with what Morngo is saying here, right? Like the corporations do have a disproportionate impact on climate change because as a result of their control of the market and such, as a result of their consolidation of resources and capital, they dictate the terms through which we engage with the world. So, like when a person, for instance, is thinking about their rubbish, right? Like, of course, the individual action of tossing it in the bin or on the streets and not bothering to recycle and being an unhealthy consumer is on their end, but it's mediated through systems which don't really offer much of a choice. So, for instance, in the UK, we obviously have like recycling plants and such, and we have various mechanisms to try and do our bit, but we still use non-renewable energy sources. We still rely on electrical goods which come from incredibly exploitative conditions. We still have public services which are defunded, and thus the extent to which we can actually recycle is constrained through the actual mechanisms of the country themselves, which are ultimately privatized and handed over to massive corporations. And so I suppose there's an element of this argument that I don't think is complete without that sort of political analysis too. Like the idea that whilst it is important to incentivize people and get people sort of thinking, oh, what can I do? Doing that also comes through challenging our wider social structures. This comment here, but from some random geek, capitalism keeps them 99% working and just surviving to keep them too tired to want to change things. And it's true, right? Like for as much as the person that is flippantly sort of responding, oh yes, well China does this, so why can't we do anything? That person most likely, and obviously that's a bad faith sort of rich people who say stuff, but that person is also someone who exists in society, who is maybe working quite a consuming job, and perhaps with some not justification, but with some legitimate anger, feels why are we focusing on me, on some random person in society when Foxconn have like dozens of factories across the Chinese coast, polluting tons more than one person can do in their lifetime. When fossil fuel companies have huge stakes in governments across the West and across the world, basically, and make a killing from the constant subsidies and contracts they receive to drill more oil and to
Oh, uh-oh.
my screen. Okay, good. Right, I'm still
Here.
here.
You froze for a second there. No, you're good. You're good.
Yeah, it was big oil trying to strike me down.
Damn you, BP.
Things like that, right? Like the fact that their lifetime salary will be a drop in the ocean next to the wealth of even one of these corporations. Like there's a clear disproportionate element, which I would pull up the comment that Morngo's left, but I can't on this end. So if you're watching, leave a comment on my side as well if you want me to drag it on. I'd let Ayden do it, but his comments, we're not streaming both ways. But you know what I mean? Like there's that sort of power differential, which I think is important to also challenge alongside the environmental stuff, which would lead us to challenge the power structure and the higher ups rather than sort of focusing too greatly on individual choices.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I mean, the reality is that when you or I think about the conditions that a medieval peasant would have toiled in the fields 500 years ago or so, most people are led to the idea that those people would have been working back-breaking labor, they would be worked to death and exploited horribly, but the reality of the situation is actually not that at all. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of things in our modern everyday life that I certainly take advantage of that a medieval peasant doesn't. But having over 120 days out of my year dedicated as public holidays with which I would be able to rest and recover are certainly not one of them. And that's not even accounting for the fact that most of the time, in the middle of the day, you would be allocated a several hour long rest period to be able to go about your business, have a sleep, visit friends or family. So the idea that workers, the idea that individual people are these units of profit, whereby as much labor can be extracted from them as possible, is a very modern kind of idea. It's something that's really only emerged within the past 250 to 300 or so years.
Yeah,
Um,
advent of modernity, right? Like
right,
the industrial revolution and such.
right. Like, well, that's a completely other different subject. I won't get too far into the historical lens of things, but suffice it to say that I certainly agree that capitalism has a large degree of blame as to why the world looks the way that it does right now, because capitalism is a fundamentally unsustainable system over a prolonged period of time. As a as creatures that inhabit a finite planet with finite resources, but also rely upon a system of infinite growth, I don't really think that we're going to be able to make this work all that much longer. And that's why you're seeing things like universal basic income being kind of bandied about by certain people. I think Musk was one of the ones that was talking about it not too long ago. The idea that we need to start floating this UBI because, well, what if AI comes around and replaces all of these people's jobs? It's the idea of, I'm sure you've heard the term before, late stage capitalism. The idea that
Exactly.
capitalism
Yeah.
is kind of on its last legs as we currently understand it right now, and that universal basic income is almost this bandage that needs to be put on it. But think about it from this perspective, though. If AI does indeed come around and replaces everybody's jobs, then everybody is all of a sudden going to be found not just with an abundance of free time through the fact that their work has now been undercut from them, but they're going to find themselves with a massive lack of any means of actually keeping themselves alive. And that's why UBI, I think, is being floated by some of these people, because I feel like one of the only reasons why this current system is really all that sustainable is because it does keep you subservient for 40 to 50 to 60 hours a week. You're just simply working too often and too hard, you don't really have time to think about the wider implications of the system that you live in or exist within. So if we get that time back, if the average everyday person actually does have a few hours every single day, once again, to be able to dedicate not toward work, but toward their own pursuits, then I think that that has the potential of going one of two ways. Either we use that time productively, and we use that time to be able to enhance things within our own communities, to be able to build up community action that actually fosters some sort of connectivity within people again. Because I'm sure you've noticed, you know, you look at old footage of people on the street maybe 50 or 60, 70 years ago, and for some reason, those people are a lot more amicable and sociable with each other than a lot more people are nowadays, you know? I feel like people are a lot more cold and distant with each other than they were
Socially
even just
isolated, right?
right
Like
than
they
they
don't get that regular connection.
yeah than they were even compared to like our grandparents or great grandparents generation. And it can't be due to the fact that they just didn't have time to talk, because my grandparents and great grandparents worked plenty hard, as I'm sure yours did as well, right? It wasn't a matter of a lack of time alone. It was also a matter of the sense of civic pride. It was this idea that I am a member of this community, and as a member of this community, I am going to actively do whatever I can to try and make this community a better place. I can only hope that if we get this time back, that we begin reorienting our focus back towards some levels of civic pride, because it is that civic pride, that local pride, that I need to make my immediate area around me a better place, that I think really begins setting that fire off within people. I know it certainly did within me, where I began looking at things not just within my community, but what about what's going on within my city in general? What's going on within my province? How can I get involved in a wider scale? I think a lot of people can begin doing that when they see that there are people within their community immediately around them that also care and also want to get things done. And it's interesting because I thought when I first started um, trying to organize within my community that it would be universally well received, but funnily enough, that wasn't the case at all, actually. I tried to put up a couple of notices in some online forums associated with my community. And the admins that run that community essentially told me that, well, unless you have an official permit from the city, there's no way that you're going to be able to post that here, and you have to go through all this bureaucratic red tape. And I had a long form argument with them, which essentially just boiled down to, do you want your community to be festooned with a load of garbage everywhere that you go? Yes or no? To which point they just blocked me. So there are some people out there that they do want it done, but they only want it done through very specific means, right? You have to go through all this bureaucratic red tape. You have to make sure you jump through all these hoops to make sure that it's done the right way. And I just don't think that that's super productive. As long as somebody is actually getting the garbage cleared out of the area, that's what needs to be focused on. Not whether or not they have some special piece of paper that gives them permission to do that, right?
Yeah, yeah. Last team in chat, by the way. Wally, yeah, it was a cautionary tale. Wise words, huh? As in response to the AI stuff, which we'll touch on in a second. But to go work backwards on what you started with, I absolutely agree that there's a bureaucratic element to a lot of the stuff, right? Like different competing factions within states which try and maintain their own social power, maintain their own sort of control over little pockets, and make it harder to actually, as you've sort of found out, solve the immediate problem, right? Like the problem is there's too much rubbish in the streets and in various areas. The solution's fairly obvious. Let's organise and collect it and gather it up and such. But through the mediations of the various competing bodies and property rights and all this sort of stuff, it's hard to actually realise it. And I think that's another problem of our sort of capitalistic economy, right? Like our rationalised way of doing things. Like because we have these competing bodies within society that all sort of have various metrics and all have to maintain various pursuits of capital in their own way and have to sort of justify them to authorities above them and beneath them, and it's all sort of a various networks of power. Like it's all sort of positioned on the same premise of competing, out businessing someone else.
Right.
I think we lose a lot of the human touch. The idea that we actually have needs as a collective, and if we work together and think pragmatically and think sort of communicatively, we can actually solve a lot of it without having to. I can imagine sort of just sitting around waiting for an email to come through saying yes, we can do this obvious thing that needs doing, and then getting blocked as you've said you were, right? Like it's difficult, and I think that also then links into why some people, even when it's in their best interest, would react negatively to it, right? Like they aren't thinking about the obvious benefits of it. They can sort of only think in the the terms of, okay, well, what affects my standing? Will I be assessed negatively for having allowed someone to do something without the necessary permits? Will I be assessed negatively for breaching some obscure violation or something? Hello, Morngo in my chat now, as well as Ayden's. A multi-stream party, yeah. But there's also, I think, the need to, like, I think, remember that, as you've said, right, like there's stuff that needs to be addressed in the long term, like the current manner of just endlessly accumulating, endlessly using resources just isn't in congruence with our current reality. Like we don't live on a planet that's like automatically generated, despite what some people would like to pretend. And AI is so frustrating because automation could be it could be an amazing tool. The idea that, as you've literally expressed quite nicely, like we could free up so much time for ourselves get back our sleep cycles, get back our communicative time, be a better community, and then so much more easily have the energy and time to think, okay, we've got a lot of rubbish in this area, let's tidy it up. We've got all this space that needs clearing, let's turn it into something like a communal space, like a nice open market, a nice open park, something that could actually bring people together and help actually enjoy life more than just sat in a 9 to 5 job, commuting back and forth for an hour, eating, maybe having 10 minutes like not doing anything where you're just scrolling on your phone and then going to bed. Like there's so much more that could be done in society if we had a bit more time to ourselves. But because we live in a system where everything's commodified, because fundamentally the capitalist needs to generate profit and generate wealth and be the best, biggest fish in the pond or whatever,
Right.
it turns it into just another thing to puts into a marketable business practice. Like you look at the way AI is used, and it's just complete slop. Like I don't know about you, but so many just awful. Like my social media. I mean, I don't use Twitter anymore, but it was a cesspit. Like before I left, like it was awful. YouTube, I know YouTube Short. Like I'm quite a big football fan. Like I love sports and stuff. And there's so many videos that are just like here's the best players from 2000 to 2009, and it's like AI versions of them walking out in kits, and it's the weirdest, worst way to consume content, but it's popular because it's just everywhere, right? Like it's easy to make. You can just type in stuff and it's just poured out onto your timeline, and it generates enough attention to then be a trend and be dominant and such. And then the companies, because they've sort of coerced this stuff onto your time, I think, oh well, yes, well, this is good. This is what people want. Let's double down on this. And it is bad for the environment as well, because it's at the same time as being ubiquitous on these platforms, it's also like requiring massive data processing centers that bulldoze more land, raise the heat temperature of the local area, like need a metric ton of energy to actually get into existence in the first place. Like, it's a disaster.
The
So,
amount of water they need for cooling.
oh,
Yeah, I
just
mean,
just
it's absolutely
horrendous.
obscene. It's obscene. And when it comes to these sorts of AI programs, yeah, I agree that there's a lot of detrimental things that they are doing to the environment. There's a lot of things that need to be addressed as far as that is concerned. Absolutely. But it is a question at a certain point of, is there any positive that we can get whatsoever when it comes to this new invention, this new technology? Because for all of those people out there that say that they're going to get rid of all of these data centers and they're going to completely get rid of this new industry that's come up, I'm sorry to say, there's only really a question of how much we can kind of tamp down and limit it. Pandora's out of the box, though, unfortunately. There's no possible way. It's kind of like saying we need to get rid of this newfangled automobile because it's creating all this pollution. Well, there's a lot of benefit that the automobile can bring in addition to all of its horrible destructive tendencies. We just need to be able to harness it in a way that is actually conducive to being able to improve the quality of life of the average everyday person. And I do think that
Yeah.
that's certainly possible. It's just a question of whether or not that is actually how it's going to be implemented.
No,
Um,
exactly. Like I do think that. So you're gonna say more then? Sorry. Like was that?
no, no, no. You can feel free to add to that.
Or just on that point, like because I do agree, right? Like it's important to be pragmatic and think, okay, well this exists, so let's think about what we can do with it. And certainly, especially with generative AI, like there is something to be said for what it could be used for. Like I saw someone who's doing sign language and it's generating the translation of that sign language into the written form of English, right? Like
Right.
there are things that could be really useful for it, but that has to come through more. Like I don't think it can come through our current sort of capitalistic model, because it's, as we're sort of seeing, just a quick tool for these companies to lay off tons of workers, get rid of a load of like regulation, like get around a load of regulations by tapping into a currently unregulated or massively deregulated compared to other
Right.
industries pool. And I think also given how devastating it can be for the environment, like there's not really the time to, like with the car, like obviously people, I mean, you can find papers that sort of say, yes, maybe depositing this much CO2 into the environment is gonna have some consequences in the future, right? Like it's actually quite
Right.
amazing that you can find papers from like the Victorian era that realized that just the amount of
Yeah.
stuff being spewed out was gonna have some consequences. But unlike with the car, which I think sort of there's a very obvious benefit to having cars over horses.
Right.
Certainly, into like just in terms of what you can do with it, like the fact you're not got feces everywhere,
Yeah, I'd
like
rather
you
not
just
walk around the street and be ankle deep in horse shit personally.
exactly right. But there's I think a difference because with the car, like obviously it's grown alongside human growth, like human populations increased, and so there's more cars as a result. And whilst obviously there's loads of academic literature about how harmful cars are, but they also it's another one that again could be you could have electric vehicles if we didn't have a bad capitalist system. You'd have an electric vehicle economy which would be much healthier for the environment
Well,
if we weren't obviously in our current thing. But with AI, because it's like the internet is massive anyway, right? So there's such a network that exists and it's all happening all at once. And I think there's a much bigger danger there than compared to the sort of slower comparatively growth of automobiles and cars and such, because obviously the first cars, compared like there's been 100 years of cars, whereas AI I think has had a much quicker in the sort of digital age growth, I would say.
yeah, I would say that when you look at the early days of the automobile and you look at some of the weird and wacky implementations that were put in for some of the early car designs, it's really easy to look at some of the early car designs and just kind of laugh your face off and go, that's absolutely impractical and it's ridiculous and there's no possible way that anybody would actually get any real world use out of it. Well, there was only one way to actually be able to practically find out whether or not it was going to be useful or not, and that was implementing it in the real world and seeing whether or not people had a use for it. And I think the same is true of AI right now. I think you're seeing AI being used in a lot of places where it really isn't optimal to be able to use it because people are essentially throwing everything they can at the wall and seeing what sticks. It's at this very early preliminary stage where we know that it's really good at a few things, we know that it's kind of good at a few other things, and we don't know whether it's good or not at the vast majority of things. So we're trying to put it into just freaking everything right now because maybe, just maybe, it might be way better at me than that at flipping those pancakes or at getting the freaking schedule for my itinerary for the next month laid out perfectly, or any manner of different random tasks, right?
Yeah,
It's only time is going to be able to tell whether or not we're going to be able to implement those practically, but it's a question as well of, like you said, in our capitalistic system, is it really only going to be applied in ways that are practical, or are these companies going to try to continue to shove it down our throats, even in areas that it's been proven not to be practical at? And we kind of are
yeah.
seeing that in things like Windows, for example. The vast
Ugh.
majority of people who use Windows 11, myself included, absolutely despise a lot of the features that Microsoft are putting into the platform. And why are they continuing to do it? Well, it seems, if you look into their internal documentation, that right now it's essentially a sunk cost fallacy, where we've poured tens of billions of dollars into all of this technology. Surely we're going to find a reason for why we did that eventually, right? And I just don't. I really don't see the practical benefit of something like that. I know that this might be a bit veering off into the political spectrum of things, but I personally, I told you in our prelude to this conversation that I consider myself to be a bit more of a kind of Scandinavian type of social democrat rather than
Yeah.
a democratic socialist. And I would say that my primary reason for that is because when you have a system as fundamental as capitalism, as all reaching, all encompassing as capitalism, trying to completely overthrow that system and start anew has very disastrous consequences. Um, you create a lot of suffering in the short term and even the midterm when you just try to completely upend the system. I think that the best way of reforming the system is from within, and I think that it is not slow, so to speak, but this marginal change that occurs over decades of time, whereby people are able to adjust from this capitalistic lifestyle toward this more socialistic lifestyle, where things like food and housing and things critical to human survival aren't as commodified. Like what we're seeing in places like Finland, for example. Finland has nearly eliminated its homeless population completely by decommodifying housing on the lowest level and making at least access to basic housing essentially a universal human right within that country. Shockingly enough, you manage to eliminate homelessness when everybody has the ability to be able to get a home. And, I mean, when you actually look into the quote-unquote economic costs that are associated with that, yeah, there are going to be some developers that aren't going to make as much profit as a result. But really, all you have to do to pass on that cost is to just introduce a very marginal taxation on capital gains. That's all you have to do. And that's how you begin transitioning away from that. You start shrinking the top 1%, 0.1%'s wealth. Not massively, not in an eat the rich kind of, we're going to chop your head off and get all of your wealth and give it to all these other people, but by making it so that these people actually pay their fair share in taxes, closing the loopholes that they're currently exploiting whereby they do not pay their taxes, and slightly raising, not even astronomically, but just slightly raising the percentage of taxation on those capital gains creates such a glut of new capital for you to be able to distribute and use elsewhere that I really don't see how it does not create far more benefit than it does loss. And, one of the big arguments that they will give is, oh, well, if you do that, then you're going to disincentivize all of these people from living in that country. Well, if you look at the 1% of people living in Finland or Sweden or Denmark, or Norway, any of these different countries, they have not exactly been leaving in droves after these new policies were introduced. So the fears that that they've had have largely been seen to have been unfounded. And even if, let's just say, that a few of them do leave, if a few of them leave in exchange for housing tens of thousands of people, I think that that's a trade-off that I'm willing to give personally.
Definitely. Like what would we do without this billionaire? Oh no, what a shame.
But now 10,000 number 9874 has just left the country. No! But at the same time, if you're living in a purely capitalistic system, you have to have billionaire 9874 in your country, because without billionaire 9874, you're not going to experience the 0.987% GDP growth that you need to have in order to please your shareholders. I mean,
if the shareholders aren't happy, am I happy?
Exactly. It all goes back to the endless growth, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. It's exactly that. And I agree with quite a bit of that. However, Mongo is voicing my inner monologue in the chat currently. I was thinking the exact things, but but Mongo was saying. So I think what you were saying about social democracy, I think there's a lot to agree with, right? Because I think this point, firstly, the idea that we're going to click our fingers and then suddenly the sun shines through the clouds and everyone comes together and socialism is here. I don't think anyone seriously believes it's like an instant switch. I think that whilst it's absolutely pragmatic to think in terms of we're in a capitalist system right now, what can we do to change it, is definitely important. I agree with everything you've just said then. It's absolutely true that there's a higher quality of life in the Scandinavian countries, that the countries that have stronger welfare states have a better a more stable economy than ones where trust is just left to the private sector and you just crash it every few years because there's just been tons poured into unsustainable business practices. No one can afford anything, and the economy just stalls because people are just poor and unincentivized to actually do anything. So there's not the chance to do anything. But at the same time, and here's another one, which is another, when you were saying about just taking a bit off, absolutely taking a bit would be good, but they are still magnitudes richer than everyone, richer than pharaohs, right? Like so rich.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to also go back to this comment here from some random geek. I choose not to drive a car because of the CO2, but now I can't afford a car, period, even when I had a job. And I think this taps into some of the stuff which makes us anti-capitalism, not just sort of social democrats and such. Like, there's fundamentally, with our capitalist system, just a barrier to doing so much for so many people. And I think especially when you connect it to that climate matter, the fact that our economy is just built around growth, even when we have social democracy, like even when we've got the policies in place to help the little man and to put in place like social welfare and public policies, there is still that pursuit of capital which leads us to an economy which has stratified levels of society. Some random geek, this is a person who I know, who's a friend, I would say, hardworking person, but they're unable to actually access something which is, we're a car society, right? Like you fundamentally, in lots of places, need a car to get around. I'm lucky that I live in a city that has decent public transport, but that is a social policy which is ultimately dependent on the country's capitalist economy producing enough to be able to fund it. And especially in our current situation, we see right-wing movements declare war on the welfare state and public policies and basically say, we don't need this. We're going to hand everything over to the private sector, to let them, as you just said a second ago, improve the country's GDP or declare, the economy is booming because we've made $1 billion acquisition of something. Like it takes away the human element, I think, of the climate crisis, the economic situation.
Right.
And I think that the reform from within, like the problem I have with that is that whilst it is pragmatic, it ignores that the rules of the game are really fundamentally flawed. Like, as we've both sort of said, right? Like, you can't infinitely grow. You can't make profit forever. In fact, making profit at some end disadvantages someone. And when we have a system that, even with the best levers and restraints and such, is ultimately engineered towards that pursuit of more, it leads to people cutting those lines and saying, okay, well, we're going to push a bit more. We're going to cut some moral or ethical or regulatory principle in order to pursue it. And the environment's an obvious area of where this takes place, right? You only have to look at the history of like the Amazon rainforest, which I think most people, if you ask them, should we protect the rainforest? They'll say, yeah, of course. We want to protect the animals, protect the land, keep it. It's crucial for our ecosystem. If we lose that, then we're losing a huge carbon sink and going to have some pretty serious problems. But you look at what, I know Bolsonaro is not in government anymore, but the logging contracts he handed out, the actual just act of handing massive parts of the rainforest over to fossil fuel corporations and rare earth material farming and such, like that, just disgusting stuff, and it can't be undone. A lot of the stuff that we need to address is currently the private business practice of corporations and such, that when you say, well, this needs to stop, they'll say, well, here's my contract, which gives me 100 years of coal mining, say, or we've got the right to privately do what we like on our land forever because we live in a capitalist economy, and even with your social democracy, we are still ultimately capitalist. And I think that whilst I absolutely agree that I don't think anyone's sort of saying we're all just going to sort of just walk to the town hall and declare communism's here now and there's going to be nothing else happens. It's just like in a video game where you've just won the game or whatever. Like, of course, I think we need to look at the history of social movements and such and think, okay, if we aren't planning this out properly, there is going to be the chance for, a power vacuum and stuff, of course. But equally and arguably more disastrous is what happens if we keep things, not changed enough, and we plunge into this climate crisis and we reach these tipping points, which arguably I think I saw a really alarming paper that suggests that the ocean, I forget the proper name, the flow of warm air and water from the Caribbean to Europe has been
The North Atlantic
irreparably.
gyre.
Yeah. I read that this is already more than likely to be disrupted within the next few decades, and that's going to have some fairly dire consequences for European agricultural produce and such, right? But like there's so many tipping points which we're basically at the cusp of, if not already seeing, sort of be realised. And I just sort of think, for as much as, of course, it's important to be sort of sensible and stuff and plan things out, the planning's got to have some alarm and urgency, because we're
Well, it
at a
has
point
to
where
by
we
its
can't.
nature.
Yeah, no, exactly.
It has to by its nature because, like I said before, this is not something that we need to endlessly think of as this issue that some other generation down the line is going to have to face, but oh, we're not going to have to worry about it all that much. I mean, like, even for people like my parents who are 20 or 30 years older than me, right? The world that they're going to have to see before they die is going to be unrecognizable to the one that they first grew up in. And it's going to be the same for me as well. And I'm not saying that everything is going to be like a complete hellscape, but the idea that we live in a world right now where you can go get a big juicy steak, or you can go get a giant quadruple decker cheeseburger with all the fixings and get a giant meal associated with all that for very cheap costs. Like, that world is not going to be around within our lifetime, I don't think, because the sheer unsustainability that is required to be able to foster that amount of prosperity for that many people is just not going to be something that's going to be around for the entirety of our lifetimes. And I think it's really, unfortunately, going to take things like the average person not being able to go into a restaurant and get a nice steak without having to pay like thousands of dollars to do so, or the average person not being able to go fill up at the pump because the gas prices have just gotten so insanely high due to the reserves of fossil fuels around the earth getting so low. I think it's really going to take things like that the average everyday person just kind of takes for granted nowadays, just essentially vanishing and going away until people finally go, oh shit. Like, something really, really bad is happening right now, isn't it? But by that point, the ability for us to be able to do something, while still being there, of course, is objectively far less than what it is right now, or what it would have been 20 or 30 years ago. So yeah, I agree with you. There certainly has to be a degree of urgency when it comes to changing these sorts of things. Now, one of the things that I have kind of been talking about, and I'm not sure what your take is on it, but I feel like one of the ways that we begin disincentivizing the massive amounts of destruction that we're seeing on the planet right now is by moving a lot of the manufacturing that we have going on Earth right now, and a lot of the resources that we're extracting from the Earth into space. Because, don't get me wrong, there are things that are unique to this planet that we're only going to be able to find here. You're not going to be able to mine coal on the moon. You're not going to be able to have a giant forest on the moon that you're going to be able to chop the trees down off of. But you do have essentially all of the mineral resources that exist on this Earth also exist on the moon. You have huge stores of water on the moon. You have huge stores of helium-3 that can be used for fusion reaction if fusion actually gets off the ground technologically. And is that going to solve everything on Earth? Of course not. Not even close. But if you look into the amount of deforestation that mining causes, if you look into the local ecological destruction that is created by deep mining strip
Scary, isn't
mining
it?
operations. It's absolutely horrific.
There's
And
disgusting. There's mine lakes that you get where it's just like acid water,
right,
alkali, but like just revolting.
it's absolutely horrific. And I think one of the ways that we've kind of reformed things isn't necessarily just you're not allowed to do that anymore. You're not allowed to take all of those resources. I think one of the ways that we do that is by moving where those resources are extracted to a place that is objectively far less harmful. Like, I don't know if you care all that much, but I am not super partial to whether or not we strip mine the moon for all of its resources. Like, it's really not that big of a deal because there's nobody up there. There's nothing going on. We're not going to really be harming anybody by doing that, right? So I think that if we were to shift some of our focus off of this planet and begin exploiting other areas of the solar system, I think that would be a good thing for this planet because it would mean that we wouldn't have to exploit right here nearly as harshly.
See, there's a lot of convincing elements in that argument, right? Like, yeah, the idea that you're relocating the source of resource exploitation from where humans live, and in fact anything lives if it's the moon, right? Because it's a it's not habit, not the home of anything, right? It does sound like the start of a space colonialism book. Like you'd have like you'd be saying this now, and then like it cuts to like 1,000 years later, and like the human empire has taken over systems across across the Milky Way. I think that it's. I don't want to say like a fantasy because I absolutely believe that there's no limit to what people can achieve with science and with technological advancements and such. I think that we're a very young species, and it's easy to say now, oh yes, we're as good as we can get because there's so much more that humanity can do. But equally, we are in a moment in time where we are needing to sort out, with like fuel usage, right? Like the amount of energy it's going to take to actually get to the moon that regularly enough to start taking the stuff back, right? Like, or to any extraterrestrial body, like
It's
it's such an ordeal. And whilst we have our capitalist structures on Earth, whilst we've got a social organization that has hierarchy and such, the actual like collaboration you'd need to see, I think, would require serious social change that would be profound almost as the mass expansion of human resource management to beyond Earth's boundaries, right? Like,
I think that the initial upfront cost of trying to do an endeavor like this would undoubtedly be massive, yes. I think that it would be something that would be insanely expensive to get off the ground, but as soon as have you ever heard of the dark factories that they have in China?
the dark factories,
Have
maybe
you
by another name, but you
But
don't have to
yeah,
fill me in.
there are these factories in China that are entirely automated. There's not a single person inside of them, and because there's not a single person inside of them, the lights are just shut off entirely, so that these machines work in an entirely pitch black environment. Um, if we were to take ideas like that, if we were to take automated facilities and put them into Earth orbit and have a means of being able to take those resources, manufacture them in space, then yes, while the initial upfront cost would be massive for something like that, the actual incentive that comes with that, the amount of resources that you gain access to at that point, is simply gargantuan. It's well beyond the ease of accessing materials on Earth because there's no regulation really required for the moon. You don't have to worry about the zoning law for that particular section of the moon getting completely, strip mined away. You don't have to
I think
worry
that's
about.
like, I mean, the Terminator films are also running through my mind here, like Skynet and stuff. Like, I'm just imagining like all these, just mass automation and such, and then one day, like, there's suddenly a load of satellites just pointed at Earth one day. But no, in more realistic sort of such, I think that whilst it does, the idea of sort of getting around the red tape is enticing, like the idea of having like in a video game, right, where you've got like in Minecraft, where you just discover just a massive uninhabited island and you just sort of just use it for your heart's content.
Just get rid of everything.
Exactly, right? But I don't know, like I feel like we would be without that sort of social analysis. There's a risk that we reproduce the same issues we have here on the moon or beyond. Because, like, for as much as it's uninhabited, it's also still, for one, like a cultural thing, right? Like the moon looks the way it does and is important in people's lives. And I know that's not of the same importance as a lot of things, but it is still something which exists, which people have value in. And so the idea that we would sort of even as a sort of joint body, hand it over to various parties to then just, if the only goal is extract X amount of resources, there is that risk that this pursuit, especially if it's economically tethered to the capitalist element of things, turns it into a bit of a negative one. Like, because for as much as like the moon, we know nothing's there, so it's like it's fine, right? And even in our solar system, we've not discovered that there's anything remotely close to what we would consider life, a living organism. But it follows that, like, if we get to the point where we're able to perform these operations, eventually we would probably find something which comes closer to that element of life. We end up reaching a point where there's not an obvious, just not, I don't want to say barren wasteland, but just a vast expanse where we can just think about resources. There's going to be some element where there's a conflict. And when we have some random geek, I've seen a video of a moon being made out of cheese. Um, when we get to that question, if the same power dynamics of Earth exist in space, there's, I think, a huge question of, okay, are we going to have the same disastrous episodes happening like we do in the Amazon rainforest, or in indigenous land where they just put a pipeline down and get the police involved to scare away or shoot at the indigenous populations that live there and such. Again, I'm not saying that it's going to immediately turn into like human empire, enslaving alien races and stuff, but at the same time, I do think there is that sort of needs to think ethically as well about just what we do in space, and the fact that these resources, like, if they aren't publicly owned, if they're sort of like if it's like SpaceX, say that Elon Musk is a person that actually has control of these operations, like, would we really want people like that, or even any billionaire, being responsible for something which potentially is going to have a huge weighted impact on human economies, right? Because if you have this, like, let's say genuinely the resources of Moon are now accessible and we can massively transform Earth's economy and energy production and usage, but it's all in the hands of like 3 or 4 corporations. That is like, they're essentially now that they are in control of the whole planet's like trajectory, right? Because they can now say, well, too bad if you disagree with what we say. One click, right, and moon energy now only goes to this region or this country, right?
So, are you familiar with why America is kind of starting to do its renewed push back to the moon with the Artemis program? And if you're not, that's perfectly fine. The majority of people aren't.
I mean, I can guess, but I'd love to hear. You can tell me.
Yeah, the stated reason is due to, quote, renewed interest in the moon from the perspective of the Chinese government. So because China is trying to go back to the moon right now and is trying to start its process of kind of getting interests on the moon permanently, that's the primary reason why America is beginning to pursue it. And that is one of the other bigger arguments for why I think we need to kind of start pushing toward lunar exploitation sooner rather than later, is because it's just a reality that if America, or Western civilization, quote unquote, I put in really massive quotes because it's way less firm of an idea than a lot of people think that it is, if we don't begin turning our attention toward exploiting the moon for its resources, then another organization is going to do that eventually, whether that be China, whether that be India, whether that be some other different country. Given a long enough period of time, somebody is going to get up there and they're going to go and do everything they can to extract those resources. And it really is a question at that point of which group is first and which group is capable of doing it most effectively. Because if America or the UK or Canada or any one of these different countries do not invest interest in that, we are putting ourselves at a massive, massive disadvantage if indeed China's the one that does get to go up there and reap all of those economic rewards and benefits. Because then essentially it's China that gets to decide the terms as to how this new global paradigm is going to work, with them having access to all of these resources. So I agree, it would be ideal that humanity kind of waits a little while and we get our shit together, and then after we kind of solve all these problems here on Earth and everything's all hunky-dory, then we go outside of the cave and worry about non-cave problems. But the problem is that if we don't get out of the cave and go and exploit all those resources, Ugg is gonna get out of the cave and exploit all of those resources. And do you really want Ugg having all those resources? I don't think so. Oh, you're muted.
I was going. Yeah, the timing of my joke now doesn't work. I was going to say, Ugg's a nice guy. He's nice enough. He shared his meat kebab with me once.
Ugg is a nice man. Many people are saying it. The rain god fag has told me on good authority that Ugg is a good guy.
Exactly. But no, like, I do get what you're saying. Like, but yeah, but I think that's still that capitalistic thinking. I think, which is sort of. It makes sense on the one hand, but on the other, like the idea that China will go and do this if we don't, India will go and do this if we don't, like that. Firstly, wouldn't stop a so-called Western civilization country, like an America or Britain, still doing the same. But we see what happens on Earth with all the sort of conflict and the various ways, both economic, military, social, cultural, etc., that people clash and such, and especially when it fuses in with capitalism, like the idea that our nationalisms, like they're ultimately sort of constructed, right? Like they wouldn't matter as much if there weren't these economic barriers, sort of keeping people competing all the time and states competing all the time and such, right? But in space, if there's this same competition, like you can just imagine this sort of potential disaster waiting to happen, right? Of like people taking the conflicts of Earth and it just happening, in space, where all of a sudden, it's one thing to send your fight, to have an economic barricade on Earth, right? But like a space barricade, a space blockage. I think that whilst I absolutely agree that we can't sort of just sit on our hands and do nothing. There really ought to be like, it sounds silly comparing it to like the Halo video games, but like, Earth really needs to be one team basically by the time we're going off and doing stuff in space, because I think the potential for, as I say, the reproduction of Earth's social, cultural, economic, etc. problems and such, and just like an act of warfare in space, I think it would not be out of the question if we haven't done enough to, address the serious social problems we have on Earth. Like, I mean, we joke about Trump, and his side of things, but people with that mindset, with the because Trump's, he's probably not going to be alive when we do the actual space exploration, right? But his ideologues and the people in his, in that movement who are right now in the US trying to deconstruct democracy and take over as much as they can, like they would not, I don't think, hesitate to, if they're already committed to, oh yes, we're going to beat China, India, etc. into space, wouldn't hesitate to pull some heinous stuff in space, and in the sort of space ports and stuff you'd need to set up if this sort of all went ahead. And I think that and whilst it could get very silly, it's also just a massive waste of money and resources that we really don't have. Like, for as much as this could happen in the future, there's still a really long way to go that could be much smoother if
Well,
we are working together with an anti-capitalist theming.
right, and see, this is the main reason why I kind of brought this into the conversation to begin with was because the idea of exploiting other extraterrestrial bodies within the solar system is kind of one of my. It's not my entire solution, obviously, but it's one of the main ones in the face of the fact that we're currently living in a world that is being so horrifically exploited right now. Not because, like what you said earlier, you touched upon something very important. I don't think that people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and all these people are graping the planet, for lack of a better term, because they just think that it's so hunky dory and the best thing ever. I think they're doing it because they're financially incentivized to do it, right? It's beneficial to them and to their shareholders to do it, so they continue to do it. Um, but, like what we also said, this is a problem that's pretty immediate, right? This is something that's going to have to be addressed sooner rather than later. It's not something that we can just kind of go, oh, well, we're going to implement gradual little changes here and there. It's something that needs to be solved in the more immediate term. So part of solving it in the more immediate term is by not introducing, like what you agreed with me earlier. It's not like capitalism is just going to be overthrown immediately and be effective. We have to kind of gradually shift and change that system. So how, keeping all of that framework in mind, do we get these people to stop logging the Amazon as harshly as we are right now? How do we get these people to stop throwing small African children into cobalt and lithium mines? Well, we do that by incentivizing them to be able to extract those resources elsewhere. And we incentivize them to extract those resources elsewhere by giving them the means to be able to extract those resources outside of the Earth. I feel like that is the shortest term solution that actually enables these people to stop exploiting this planet as harshly.
And like, I do get it. Like, I do see it's almost like a sleight of hand, right, where you're sort of reshuffling the the attention of them elsewhere, right?
And it's not a
But
permanent solution by any means. Like, what everything that you're talking about insofar as, what are the longer term implications of this? Isn't this essentially just taking the problem and putting it somewhere else? Yes, I agree. It is taking the problem and putting it somewhere else. But it's essentially the tourniquet around the bleeding leg of humanity that I think that we really need. It's not a permanent solution by any means, but I think it stops the worst of the bleeding. And I think that that is what we need right now.
oh, see, I don't know. I don't think I quite agree because, for one, I think that assumes a certain like rationale that these people are sort of guided by, right? Like, it assumes that, as you've just said, right, like the logical brain says there is more incentive to farming the endless resources of massive celestial bodies and extraterrestrial resources elsewhere to the planet, right? No humans there to exploit, no, literally nothing there that would be a hazard to us other than space itself, which, if you've already got the technology for it, you could overcome. There's like a win-win, right? But it's a system of power, and I think handing this power to already exploited and bad people like isn't great, but it's the power fundamentally which we're questioning, like the system that has allowed this exploitation to take place is what is fundamentally being pointed to. And for as much as we can say, like, yes, well, it's going to be tricky to unpack it, one thing that definitely doesn't unpack it is giving like the same corporations maintaining lithium mining in the Congo, yeah, a massive key to the whole of the moon's resources or
Well,
Mars or wherever else you want to go.
I would, I would, I would only counter that argument by saying that why do you think it is that humanity, even though we've had slavery in our species to some degree or another, basically since the advent of agriculture, Why do you think it is that we kind of only started abolishing slavery en masse as a species around the mid 19th century?
It's a good question. I think that there's a lot of, I mean, one of them's economic, right? Like the Industrial Revolution
Precisely, yeah.
obviously made it happen. At the
Precisely.
same time, though, like whilst it's to say that it's been abolished, I think is obviously true to an extent, but it's not as though there's not the same or similar social conditions replicated like around the
Mm,
globe, right? Like for as much as like obviously the sort of chattel slavery that defined Western empires, around the turn of the 18th century, like obvious, 19th century, sorry, like obviously they are gone. They're still like, the amendment that got rid of it in America, for instance, still made exception for it, and you would argue that in another form there is still the mass exploitation of peoples. The fact that we have won many of our freedoms as a species doesn't mean that we're liberated
I mean,
from the problems of it, right? As
I
at Mongo, again, you're reading my mind. It's not as though it's just completely gone. Like we still have the frameworks because we still have the economic mechanisms which demanded it, right?
slavery is still legal. It's just called imprisonment. I fundamentally disagree with that. I think if you look at the conditions that a person had to deal with in the antebellum South in the early 19th century, and you look at the conditions of somebody in an American. Now, don't get me wrong, right? American prison is a horrible, dehumanizing institution. It is a for-profit institution, and it is absolutely awful. I'm not. You're not gonna find me saying, "Wow, guys, the American prison system is great," but I will make what I think is a fairly uncontroversial statement in saying that the American prison system is several orders of magnitude more preferable of an institution to live within than that of chattel slavery as it existed within the antebellum South. Now, the reason why I brought
I
up
mean,
the abolition of slavery was because, and you hit the nail on the head, actually. Humanity did not suddenly wake up one day, several thousand years into the institution of slavery, and go, oh my gosh, this system is horrible and exploitative and it's killing all these people, and that's why we need to get rid of it. No, we got rid of it because it was economically inviable in a consumer based economy to have a whole bunch of non consumers.
but
And
that's
it's
not. I don't
horrible.
like that is a like that is to some extent. There's that's correct. Like that's again the rational mind. You're a rational thinker and applying that rationality to the whole system. When people would have in those systems would have happily kept it, but for the massive efforts of people to, the enslaved one, but also people around that society to fight for justice. And as was said, I think in your chat, the idea that we're social creatures and on some level have that empathy and connection to others that makes us want to work together.
Of course, no.
The idea
There's a
that
very strong moral argument for abolition, and one that I wholeheartedly subscribe to. But there was always abolitionist movements prior to the mid 19th century. However, they never ended up getting further than just agitating for the removal of slavery because it did unfortunately take the economic reality of slavery being an outmoded and outdated institution for people to get rid of it. And I believe the same is true for what I am talking about, right? Because the economics, the economic factors of slavery being inviolable would be not perfectly analogous, but somewhat analogous to the idea of the economic conditions that would exist after an exploitation as large in scale of what I'm talking about of extraterrestrial solar bodies. It's going to completely change the economic and social paradigm of this species. It would completely transform how we view ourselves in the wider paradigm of this universe to be able to have access to more of those resources than we do currently. And let's face it, if we don't exploit those resources, who are they benefiting right now? Let's just say, right, that the only people that largely benefit from those resources are only a select few people. I would really, really disagree with that becoming the case because, even when you look at the worst cases under capitalism of like the Gilded Age, the living conditions that people ended up living in, the standard of living overall for people under that time period was still markedly better than the standard of living of people centuries prior to that.
I think there's a few things that are sort of creeping in here which I think aren't quite like, for as much as and it's sort of, I wanted to come on to this a second ago, but it was sort of we fast forwarded a little bit. Like when you said that the antebellum South was worse than like a current day US prison, like on some level, if we're looking at it, there's a degree of truth in that, but it's a bit pointless really, because it's still a form of slavery. Like it's still subjective. It's still in the Constitution, as Mongo again points out correctly. You know, the idea that slavery is not to be used in America, but for punishments for a crime. And then you look at how the prison system functions and the dehumanization, as you pointed out yourself, right? Like the way that it organizes itself. Like for someone that is in that system, in literally a form of torture in some cases, right? Like solitary confinement, recognized as a form of torture psychologically, but still utilized in many US prisons. The abuse from guards and such, the fact you're literally made to work regardless of whether you want to for pittance, if not nothing. Like the same framework is still there, and the same logics are still there as to what made slavery the option taken by the slave owning Western countries. Obviously, America gets the focus, but Britain did it as well. We had an empire. We literally our Commonwealth. My family. If you go back to how they ended up in West Indies, you'll see that they were taken from the African continent. It's I think really important to stress that whilst it's easy to make the economic, like, oh yes, well, society was modernizing and rationalizing, and slavery wouldn't have been the way to get people buying goods in the market was still fundamentally coordinated around an exploitation of people that produced the stuff to kickstart it, right? Like there's no the generation of the goods the industrial revolution produced in factories and such stems from steps back in the cotton field and the tobacco fields, in the various plantations that generated resources in the first place. And so, whilst I absolutely agree that slavery, I agree with the premise that slavery is not the best way to run an economy, 100%. You're not going to see me here saying, yes, let's go back. But at the same time, I really think that, and I suppose it's, I guess, where we're sort of disagreeing here, like the idea that we can sort of assume capitalism will reach a point where we can tweak it logically and engineer it so that, like, space exploration, for instance, would divert the attention of everyone away from the planet and onto places where we could incentivize the planetary exploitation that wouldn't cause a climate crisis or people turned into space and such.
That's just the thing, is that at the end of the day, while I agree with a lot of the premises of what you're talking about, I think one thing that I would at least hope would agree is unavoidable out of the scenario that I'm talking about is the reason why I'm even proposing this to begin with, is the idea that if these resources become available to exploit by these people, especially after a sufficient amount of time has gone by, enough infrastructure has been put in place within space to be able to facilitate the manufacture of these goods. When you look at how easy it would eventually become to be able to get those goods to the Earth, I mean, if you have proper gravitational slingshotting, you don't even really need much of any rocket fuel whatsoever due to the sheer low gravity conditions that you're looking at. The moon is by far the best place in the entire solar system, not just in terms of the Earth system, but in the entire solar system, the moon is the best place to have exactly what we're talking about, this giant, essentially, factory that extracts all of these resources, takes them all away, and gives them to us in their raw form to be manufactured elsewhere. That is right at our doorstep. It's right there. It's exploitable, and if we don't exploit those resources, they're just going to sit there doing nothing while we exploit all of those resources down here on the planet to the environment's detriment. So I think if we take that strain off of our environment, then I think that is a good thing for the Earth. It is a good thing that these forests no longer need to be cut down, because they are now allowed to grow in places that do have all of these deposits of cobalt and lithium and all these resources. But hey, we don't need that cobalt and lithium from the Earth because we're getting it from the moon. You know?
Like from yeah, I mean, I do see what you're saying, and I do see that this would be a potential like avenue for us to explore and such, right? But like, I think there's so many. So for one, I think there's a reproduction, like I said earlier, of the relationship we have with nature and land and such. Like, there's lots of perspectives I think which are interesting from different cultures and societies where the land, humans are one and the same with the land because we're of the same primordial matter, right? And so the idea that we'd see it as just a resource to farm forever until we run out or whatever, like to you said yourself, like place exploitation for as much as you are physically like advantaging the land, there is still something I think to being critical about how we relate to things in our life. And in my mind, there is a I think legitimate fear in even with the best intentioned billionaire going up there and doing stuff, right? The idea that the moon is just this big pool of resources to take from is one I'm not comfortable with. Like I think there is something to be said about the one of my I do a bit of piano playing sometimes, not anything professional of course, but just a bit in my spare time. Claire de Lune is a really beautiful piece of music, a really lovely tune, and for a lot of people across the world, the moon is something cultural, something that connects them to
Sure.
the quiet moments. And I think I'm not saying for a second like, oh yes, never touch anything whatsoever because people find it pretty. But I am saying there is something about how we view the world that, if not interrogated critically, could reproduce the same. People just sort of acting with the interest of, well, how can we get the most stuff out of it? Let's just plow ahead. And I also think as well, if we haven't interrogated that, like, for as much as we can, even if we get all the extraction and such right, all those resources will still sit in the inventory of some corporation that may end up just saying, well, the price of accessing moon resources is like 5,000% more than what we spent to actually get it down. And if you don't like it, too bad. Find someone else to buy it from, and it's just another corporation offering like a varied version of it. I
It could
think that
be. No, it could
like
be.
it could be, and that's the risk, right? Because if we reproduce the same elements of space capitalism, right? Like, well, I'm just an even bigger problem now because we've got, as well as corporations on Earth doing terrible things, we've now got people with the power to go into space now, like dictating the terms of the planet.
Right. And all of those are distinct possibilities. However, one of the reasons why I advocate for this is because I do believe it is one of the most immediate ways, and by when I mean immediate, I mean something that we could actually practically implement within the next century. I feel like within the next century, we could begin establishing the infrastructure such that we would be able to shift away our resource extraction away from the Earth, which gets into what Dustin was saying. He's in my side chat. Dustin says, so I understand your argument, Ayden. You were saying that humans are an infection that ruins the environment, and the better way to go about it is to spread out and ruin more environment. Well, no, I'm actually saying that we need to export our ruination elsewhere. Because I agree with you. I think, unfortunately, us as a species, the way that we operate, there is going to be some degree of ruination that occurs no matter where we go. It's a question of tamping it down. It's a question of limiting it as much as possible, or at least as much as we reasonably can. But yes, we as a species with sapience, we as a species with the brains that we do and with the social tendencies that we do, will create some level of environmental degradation where we go. That is true. But I think that it is a question of how much we create, whether or not that amount that we've created is something that can be easily reversed, and whether that environmental degradation actually needs to occur in that place, or whether it can occur somewhere else where much more minimal damage can occur. And I think all of those things are very important factors when considering this argument. Because I would love to hear some sort of alternative whereby we somehow incentivize these massive organizations that are clear cutting all of these forests, that are strip mining all of these mountains, that are causing all of this massive environmental degradation and destruction. I can see solutions for getting them off of that take place over several hundred years, but I cannot see one that can easily be implemented over 100 years at anywhere near the scale of what I'm talking about external to my argument.
Okay. I think that it's a bit of an essentialism to say, well, humans are always going to have a ruining effect on the environment. I think there's a difference between having an impact. We exist and therefore our actions are physically, literally having an effect on what we interact with. But in the same way that your gravity has an impact on Earth, and your Earth has a great impact on you, right? Like it doesn't have to be inherently harmful. It can be coexisting. It can be, like I was saying a second ago, a perspective which sees your impact on the Earth as one unto itself, because you are part of Earth, you're part of the ecosphere, and therefore needs to engage in a way that considers these impacts. It's the capitalist element, the divide between human and Earth and human and nature, the idea of these things are distinct and separate entities, I think, which makes us view it as a series of commodities to exploit and to accrue capital from, and not something that we're fundamentally dependent on. And so then coming on to what you said about timescale and such, like, oh, how can we convince these corporations in 100 years, or how can we incentivize them to do other things? I think there's our fundamental disagreement, because I think that we would fundamentally really need to reorganize how we structure our society, because ultimately we don't have 100 years to convince, for as much as like we could spend 100 years like putting in place the technology to go to the moon and start really going ahead of your plan and such, like we don't have that time, because in those 100 years, if we haven't dismantled some of the practices that happen on Earth right now, like, or say the governments which are actively tearing up climate paperwork and such, like they're actively denying climate change. Like, if we haven't done things to address them, it won't really, like the rockets that we're seeing leaving Earth, we've ones like taking Elon Musk and co out of Earth's devastated environment because they're escaping to their moon base
Right,
or
right.
whatever, right?
But my question at that point becomes, how do you what by what means do you actually cause that to happen in a time scale under 100 years, given the sheer amount of power, influence, and authority that they have, including by what you just mentioned earlier, the fact that they have very intentionally rigged the rules of the game itself in order to be more favorable toward themselves. I mean, unless you're talking about like some sort of violent means of overthrowing them, I don't really see how we could possibly cause such a radical restructuring within a time period under 100 years.
Well, that pragmatism that we were talking about earlier, I think definitely holds a part to play here, right? Like, and what you were saying about the fact that these corporations, for as large and big and powerful as they seem, are ultimately run by people who are accountable to things in the physical world. And I think that mass movements and such aren't inherently only seen in terms of, like, I don't know, the humans picking up their rifles and storming the gates or whatever. Like, it doesn't have to be
Of course.
like just that. I fully agree with you that it's a big task and it's hard to envision. I also think that there's a great deal of pressure that is yet to be applied, that absolutely could be applied to the existing governments of the world and such. I mean, I think the early days of the Black Lives Matter stuff that we saw, so right at the same time, summer 2020, right? Like, that was a huge potential. And unfortunately, because the many of the spokespeople who took place, sort of the government, the Biden administration, they, committed almost immediately to doubling down on, funding the police more, and it's like it didn't actually address anything that was being raised. But it's an example of how, because they didn't step left enough, they weren't able to actually materially address anything. I also do think that uncivil disobedience is an important tactic. If you disrupt the flow of capital, there are ways of making things realised. I think that, unfortunately, it is tricky to envision a lot of things happening in smaller ways because of the fascistic nature of the time we are. But some random geek again coming to my rescue. Um, we have had many previously ubiquitous systems that now feel inalienable to our existence. And before you respond, you brought him up a second ago. I do want to chat a bit about a certain Mr. Buck that may have made an argument or two recently, but I'll let you respond to what I've just said first.
Sure. So I would say that when you look at space exploration and you look at what humanity has done in space, I think a lot of people kind of come to the conclusion that no matter what we do in space, it's going to inherently be under the guise of some sort of private equity. It's going to be to the benefit of some sort of private equity firm or some certain corporation. But I disagree with that. When you look at the vast majority of the history of space exploration and humanity's endeavors within space, you really have to look at the people funding it. You have to look at the aims of why they were doing those missions, and you have to look at who had to gain out of those missions. Like BP and Shell and Xerox and all of these major corporations of their day didn't make a dime off of the Voyager program. They didn't see a single cent earned from that program, and yet humanity did gain an untold amount of knowledge from the Voyager program. And I think that is an example of the idea that humanity is not only capable, but has demonstrated a marked history of not necessarily a complete demodification of things within space, but certainly a disincentivization of those sorts of tendencies when going to space. That tendency has been eroded away due to a process that you alluded to earlier, privatization, something that I despise. The privatization of NASA has kind of created a lot of these systems whereby they are cooperating with like Blue Origin and SpaceX and all of these different private entities rather than relying upon their own funding, because NASA kind of gutted their entire budget. Because Congress kind of gutted the entire budget of NASA. But that does not mean that is the only path that can be moved forward with humanity in space. We have a marked history of going to space for non-capitalistic, non-profit means, and we can continue to do that. I also believe that even if it does become capitalistic or profit-driven in nature, it will be far more easy to regulate under an environment where there is little to no precedent guiding the exploitation and extraction of those resources, because one of the major reasons why a lot of these corporations are as horrible as they are on Earth is because they rely upon centuries of contracts and precedent and insider deals within each other to kind of keep themselves propagated and alive. That environment will be a lot more easily regulated, in my opinion, when that centuries and millennia worth of precedent is not there, and when those things can be drafted in a more I'm trying not to say in a vacuum because it's such a dumb pun, but yeah, in a vacuum is essentially the best way of putting it, as opposed to the paradigm that exists here on Earth. But yes, let's talk about Dustin before we
Now, just on that, I don't want to drag out too much more, but very quickly, I do agree with a lot of that. Absolutely agree that there is some beauty actually in the human collaboration that got people to the moon, got people into space. This Artemis project as well has been a rare, nice thing to come out of America. In a sea of just awful.
Right.
I just worry that that, like, for as much as it's a blank slate, it's a blank slate also for corporation XYZ to write their crap all over it. But at least we're in agreement that there's a lot of potential there. But yeah, on to the topic everyone wants to hear about, Dustin Buck. So I actually hadn't spoken to him properly, and so I went on the Making Hell Nervous podcast,
Ah.
which I was actually. So I emailed Jeremiah ages ago. Like, see, I left a comment. He said, "Oh, email me." So I emailed him, and he was like, "Oh yes, you can come on at this time," and it's like 3 a.m. or something UK time. And I say, and it's back and forth me saying, yeah, well, that's not really going to be feasible. And 3 a.m. on a Wednesday as well, so not even like a weekend where I'd maybe want to stay up that late.
Right.
So at one point he sent me an email saying, "Yeah, I'm really sorry. I'm not, I'm not doing very well. I can't do any more streams." Obviously that changed because there were more streams. They a lot of so I'm in a community with a few other people, and so a lot of because they're all mainly in America, like they'd all spoken to them at sort of a more opportune time. But I think they. Because as I'm sure you've listened along to it as well. They're quite conservative. They're quite religious, and they say really ridiculous things. So they've become a bit sick of doing these call-in shows. But then I finally, after months of trying to get it sorted, I'm online at the same time as they're online. They do their stream. I go on to the stream with Jeremiah, and Ryan is sat there listening along, and Dustin's there. And so at one point in the stream, because Jeremiah is a really, I don't know if you've ever spoken to Jeremiah, but he's a very, presents himself as the sort of the spokesman, the suave, sort of neutral host. But, you get speaking to him and he's very, just, I don't want to say slimy, but I mean, that's the, he's not a very, there's not a lot of, pleasantries once you actually get started. And he worms out of committing to anything. Anyway, Dustin's there, and I bring up the fact that on their channel they claim to be they're making hell nervous, but they spend their whole time moaning about seeing a pride flag in church or what's the other? Or even in that conversation, you say to him you voted Trump, but Trump's wasting your taxpayer money on bombing kids in Iran, and they're like, well, war's messy, and it's yeah, just staggering. But through that, Dustin and I start talking on that stream, and Dustin's like, he's saying slurs and stuff, and Jeremiah boots me out of the call and says, "Oh, he's so disingenuous. This is why we're not doing call-ins anymore." And so I thought, well, I'm not leaving it there. Dustin is now an ex-person that I want to speak to, and lo and behold, Dustin's now doing thousands of streams for thousands of hours on his show, which I heard you on actually a few of them. That's also where I sort of saw you. I saw you on the 5 or 6 hour one or so.
Oh my god!
Which I don't even want to say anything about that one. My goodness.
There's a lot to be said about that one. Must be said. I was not the star of that interaction. Raptor Blue was the star of that interaction for sure. I mean, credit where it's due. He literally sat there for the entire 5 hours and just had it out with Dustin the entire time. I don't know how he does it, dude. I really don't. Clearly, he's been in the streaming game a lot longer than me, because I could not even imagine having that amount of mental stamina to deal with that for 5 hours straight.
I mean, it was a group thing, right? Because initially, I think it's just him and it's just Dustin and Raptor, and then Q's there as well. Iron Gullet shows you got 10 people in the call at one point. I'm pretty sure. So I imagine the sort of the fun of being there as a group probably drags it on a little bit. Raptor Blue says, "Cause I'm a freak." You're not a freak, Raptor. You're not a freak. I feel like. But no, so obviously there's loads of really awful stuff. I mean, he's sexually harassing Raptor. He's saying racial slurs. He's just being an awful human being, right? And so I actually saw the first minute of that stream, and thought, I'll just watch this tomorrow. It's 2 a.m. in the UK. I'm just gonna go to bed. And so I wake up and the stream's still going on. It's I'm thinking, what on earth have I missed? So I then, because I'm at university, obviously because it's midweek, right? So I'm watching little bits of it across the next few days and trying to work out what on earth has happened in this stream. And obviously hearing all the weird stuff that he came out with, all the him basically doxing himself, him not even basically actively saying, "I'm here, come and fight me." all this stuff. And I leave a few comments on his channel because like I'm, at this point I'm missing out on this. Like I want to talk to him as well.
Right.
And so he responds. He's like, "Yeah, when are you free?" We try and sort it out. And lo and behold, yesterday evening, actually technically this morning for me, it was actually really early on Thursday morning.
Right.
We get talking, and so I'm as I've hopefully conveyed here, like I'm not a particularly like vitriolic, angry person. I sort of like to think that I want to genuinely speak to people, and contrary to the myth of the left disagree with everyone they don't like or whatever, I was willing to actually converse with this person,
Mm-hmm.
but Dustin just fundamentally can't interact in a way that is conducive to a natural conversation. Like, because the second I'm saying anything, he's like, "Oh, what do you want? Why are you saying that?" Like, just swearing, yelling, screaming about how I apparently, I'm trying to like, you know, say all these things. I mean, I'll fully say, he's a bigot. Like, he is a massively prejudiced, awful person. Like, I'll just say that now. Like, the things he's said, there's no qualification. Like, he is fundamentally all the things that he argues he's not. But he just fundamentally can't interact.
I'd say that there's certainly when he gets into I call it his moods. When he gets into his moods, he certainly becomes much, much, much more difficult to interact with. Basically, no matter who you are. Dustin and I have a very interesting history together because I first started out being a bit of a Dustin hater for a while. Because I agree with you, there's a lot of qualities about Dustin that I very fundamentally disagree with. He has a lot of ideas that I do not agree with on any level whatsoever. But after having so many arguments and having so many disagreements and having so many issues with him, there were two fundamental factors of his character that I could not miss. And they were the fact that he is a very. You may disagree on the principles that he holds, and I do too, but he's a very principled person. He's somebody that holds a specific set of principles, and he does not deviate from them. No matter what. No matter who says what, no matter who does what, he will hold to those principles till the day he dies. And he is an extremely loyal person in the idea that if he finds somebody that he considers to be his friend or that he likes, he will never go behind that person's back and say something different to what he had said on another occasion. He is very good at sticking to what he said as far as his loyalty to a person is concerned. And you know what, dude? I just damn it, man. Those are the two biggest qualities of a person that I need to have in order to consider that person to be my friend on any level whatsoever. I need you to be somebody who is principled, somebody who doesn't just jump around and say whatever you need to in that particular moment in order to get along with a certain group of people, and I need a person to be loyal. And if you are those two things, you can be some of the worst qualities of a human being possible, and I will still, for some reason, consider you to be my friend.
But I
Because,
mean, like I get what is like loyalty and being principled are obviously like good qualities, but like then they're being applied in such an awful way. Like because I mean, you could say that like Jigsaw from the Saw films is principled, right? And you could say that like Jason Voorhees was loyal. Like so, it's a little bit like you know, you know what I mean, right? Like
but
they're
you know
not.
what, dude? I hear that. I get that, right? And like I said, trust me, okay, when it comes to his racist bullshit, Dustin is dead fucking wrong about that, and he's stupid for all of that, and I call him stupid for all of that to his face. Don't get me wrong. But
Raptor says in the chat, he just said you weren't his friend to marry and then backtracked the next day.
right, I actually asked him about that, and the reason why he said that was because he thought that I didn't consider him to be my friend. But I do, I really do, and that just goes to show that.
But like, I don't like. It's almost like what? So it's like he's just been around you for so long, but he's he just you've just got some. I mean, it's what loyalty is there, I suppose, because like I guess loyalty in the sense that he's just always on the same videos and such, and the Making Hell. I mean, that was really curious actually because the Making Hell Nervous group like don't seem to. I mean, they all hang out together and such, but they always argue. They always like badmouth him. Jeremiah on our stream like was telling. He was like he always speaks over Dustin and says, "Oh, don't be slanderous, don't be rude, don't be swearing." Like
But when have you
there's
heard
this.
Dustin say something bad about them? Let me ask you that.
But I mean, that's in some ways. I would say that. I mean, not to. I mean,
That's
what's the
what I'm
stuff
talking
that,
about,
like,
dude. That's what I'm talking
no,
about.
but he's like he's only but he if he doesn't have any other options, right? Because his only social interactions appear to be like his job and just
It's not that he
random
doesn't have an
YouTube
option.
calls.
He does. Trust me, Dustin, if he feels a certain way about somebody or something, will not hesitate to let you know what his feelings are about that. And in another way, weird way, dude, it's endearing to a certain degree. In an age where there's so many people that you interact with every single day who put on airs, who have this fake persona that you never really get to kind of peek behind and see what the real person is underneath. It is genuinely refreshing on a certain level to deal with a person who is all id and no ego.
No, but you peek behind and the real person underneath is just this
Oh,
awful man.
Just
Like
got some really, really, really fucking fucked up ideas about the world and how it works and why it's the way
fundamentally
that it is.
can't have a
Yeah.
conversation with. Like, has he ever had a conversation with you where it's not
Oh,
like
yeah.
devolved into screaming and
Oh, yeah.
swearing?
That's the
Like-
thing. Is that when I look at Dustin interact with people like Raptor, I
Be racist to him as well. Very
oh yeah,
racist.
oh yeah.
And weirdly like sexual too. Some of the stuff he was saying.
Yeah,
Like,
that was fucking
sexual
hilarious.
harassment. I like on the set in the sense, but like obviously it's hilarious in a sense because like it we're all sort of sat there laughing at this person, but on the other hand it is like still
A little weird.
very creepy and weird and
No, I
bigoted
agree.
behavior. Like
No,
this,
I
it is
agree.
still like a messed up thing. Like
I
for as
agree.
much as like you wouldn't like want this to actually happen, like outside of the sort
Oh,
of
God.
ironic humor of being in a call with someone that's just this atrocious human being.
If Dustin and Raptor were actually physically together in the same room together, I would probably have to put up one of those like dividers they have in prison for like when they do the prison phone calls. You know, like one of those clear glass dividers that he can't reach through and claw him or something like that. That would probably be what would be necessary in order for them to both.
But
have
even that, I
the same
mean,
room.
it's like the only reason Raptor has been so sort of on his case is because Dustin's been so like
Right.
posting weird AI pictures of like random black children that he's got the AI to generate and stuff, and saying, "Oh
Wait.
yes, I wonder what." I'll show. I'll scroll. Let's have a look. I'll
I
show
didn't
you.
hear about that. Hold on.
Let
I
me
didn't know about
let me
that.
share my screen. Got also like because of these last few days. Now when I type in D on my Google search, Dustin's thing comes up first. So my thing's been. Alright, let's share my screen. Hold on. How do I do this? More technical brilliance from the.
Have you ever
channel
heard
here.
of a man named Gigi Allen?
I've not. No, I'm not. Not as familiar. Share
So-
screen.
Gigi Allen was a comedian who would do and say some of the most radical, absurd, obscene things that you could possibly think of. Like, I can't even say the things that he did on YouTube without getting, like, some sort of flag on the video. But suffice it to say, he did things that were absolutely beyond the pale on a regular basis. And yet he still had a fan base of people. Now, if you ask Gigi Allen's fans, would you do the things that you see Gigi Allen doing? Do you support the things that Gigi Allen is doing? A lot of them would say no, but they're just so fascinated by the character of Gigi Allen. They're so fascinated by the guy and who he is that they're not necessarily willing to look past it. If anything, they incorporate it into, like, part of who he is as a person. but it's almost a similar kind of fascination that I have for Dustin.
Oh, I get the fascination. Like, I get the fascination. I'm fascinated by this guy as well. Like, but I mean, you call him a friend, and it's like, to me, it's just like so. So I mean, his pictures of his patio. You know, he's made this baseball field look nice.
Right.
And then, I mean, what's this one? He's moaning about Carl Sagan. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Bit ironic that he's saying this personally, but oh, what was that? Where's the other one? This was a weird tangent he went on about vampires in one of the streams.
He and Alex.
This one, here we are. How I sleep at night knowing I said naughty things to Raptor Blue. Like, what is this? What is this? So strange. Next one's about him as well. I wish Raptor Blue knew this guy. It's Frederick Douglass. Like, no idea where this one's come from. It's just more of his weird racial stuff. Here he is thanking Raptor for subscribers. Put Raptor in the thumbnail. There's some stuff about Democrats. Me knowing they're going to blame the coming food shortages on climate change and then try to control the farms. What is this? Like, you know, I know who I am. I'm the dude playing the dude disguised as a racist dude. Like, what is his mind? When should I feel like slapping a nigger today. Like, just a really bizarre guy. Really, really bizarre. And I sort of think crosses over into just like a person that I don't know. Like, I don't see how. You know, like a fascination. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm fascinated by a lot of online people, but a friend. Like, I mean, I get, and even like just a guy you go on a guy you go on like hangouts and stuff with, like you know, YouTube videos and such, right? But
Right.
a friend, like, what? I mean, I get that, you know, you like that he's speaks his mind or whatever, but I don't know, like this guy, like really.
I mean, I get it. No, I get it. I wouldn't expect you to be like, ah, yes, that is the perfectly accurate summarization that ties everything together in a nice, neat little bow, and now I can comprehensively understand why you consider him to be your friend. I mean, in order for you to really fully understand it, you would have had to have been around for all the interactions that we've had together and stuff like that. It's complicated, but I will say that there are two fundamental qualities that a person needs to have in order to be my friend. That is, they need to be consistent. They need to not just jump around all the time and just say whatever they need to at any particular moment in order to get some sort of social advantage out of a situation or to try to get out of a certain situation. And I need them to be consistent in the loyalty that they have for the people in their life. And if they are able to embody those two categories, then I am capable of being that person's friend. Now, it's not only those two things. I would say make Dustin my friend. I would say that there is a side of Dustin that you guys haven't necessarily seen as well.
A gentle, loving, non-racist
yeah, oh yeah,
side.
definitely gentle and no. There's a side of him that is genuinely like he's like a working stiff dude. He's just a hard-working fucking construction worker who's working his ass off and he's trying his best to make a living for himself. I get it, dude. I get it. Look,
No,
I
get
know
that
all
he.
of the horrible things that he's said make it kind of difficult to conceptualize that and imagine that, but I'm not just bullshitting you when I say that.
Of course, no. I have no doubt that he works hard on that baseball field. You know, I have no doubt about that. And you know, people bond in many ways. Like I'm sure you've spent a lot of time with him on a call and such. I don't know. I just think like there's. I also like you said he's like principled and loyal and such. Like the principled.
Damn it, Dustin, in my side chat, you're not making this you just called Raptor Blue Raptor Jew in my side chat,
God.
Dustin. You're not making this easy for me right
Is he in the other
okay?
chat? Yeah, are you listening in? Hey, hello, Dustin. Like, if you're listening along. Yesterday, Dustin booted me out of our stream, by the way. Like, I think he had to take a phone call or something and just, like, abruptly booted me out and such. Yeah, but he said he was, you say he's like principled and such. Like, I have no doubt that he firmly believes in like what he believes in, but it almost like, no, I suppose like, someone can be sort of confused in themselves. Like when he said to me that he doesn't like going to churches where people speak in tongues, but then he sort of like pals around with people that like making hell nervous guys, right? I mean, I feel like this is a person who, I mean, the loyalty is very much just like will spend time where he is tolerated, i.e. where he won't face the social repercussions of calling people racial slurs and other ableist slurs and stuff, right? Like, and it's,
I guess,
like, go ahead, sorry.
I guess the way that I like, it's kind of like what I said earlier. Like, Dustin, during his conversation with Raptor, said several things that, if anything, made his situation way worse than it otherwise would have been for himself, right? Like, not only does he say things that are detrimental to other people, he'll actively say things that will, like, hinder his own position in an argument, or hamstring himself in an argument, but he does that because he doesn't have this aspect to him in his conversations where it's like this voice in his mind that's like, let me edit out that piece of information about how I went to prison because that would be disadvantageous to me during this argument. And I gotta be honest with you, dude, there's an element of just sheer unadulterated honesty to that I do think is kind of endearing.
Endearing in the same way that it's nice not to have to go through the small talk and such, and you're going straight to the point, but it's a point which is still like it's like if
awful.
Yeah, like imagine if you're in a restaurant and someone, like if you've got two chefs, one says, oh, I've made this amazing meal, and you eat it and it's just like a bowl of crap, right? And then another chef says, no, I've put no effort into this, you're gonna eat my shit. Like, you're still eating someo's.
Which one would you rather hear before you eat it, though? Which one would you rather hear?
I would not eat at a restaurant, is what I'd be doing. I think, why am I sat here? I'm going to a different venue. Like, and I think that's and like even with because there's loads of things that are in Dustin's life which genuinely are awful. Like he's clearly he's living in his car. He's had a hard life from what he says about his childhood and his family. Like, it sounds really tricky.
Essentially didn't have a childhood.
Well, exactly, right? It sounds really awful, but that's true of lots of people. And at some, you can't. It's not like you can just say, "Oh, well, bad things happen to me, so then I'm free to be absolutely abhorrent to everyone else in my life ever." And like, I think that for as much as it's like refreshing to not say, to not have any filter, at some point you got to think, okay, well, what is it that I'm actually saying here? Why is it that like every interaction I have online is like a shouting match, or even on Making Hell Nervous, for instance, right? Like the conversations that I've heard where he's not like in open conflict with someone, they're just sat there, like they're not even like, it's just Ryan just sat there. Jeremiah saying some story about how he's like enjoying his motorbike or something, whilst he's not like. Who's the other? I've never even. I mean, I don't really know much about Tim. He was calling me disingenuous. He was calling me and the rest of the chat disingenuous. The other day.
Tim is a blowhard.
He strikes me as a very certain type of person, but I don't want to assume. I'm hoping at some point to complete the MHN roster and sort of have, yeah, exactly, right, like the Grand Slam of internet debates with all four. I've got half of the Infinity Stones, so I just need Tim and Ryan to complete the set.
Your power's so close at hand.
Exactly. I just sort of think. I can see what you're saying in the sense that compared to the rest of Making Hell Nervous, there is some honesty like to Dustin, but it's honesty steeped in dishonesty, because it's like you're just like unable to engage with a conversation without screaming and swearing. You can't listen to what a person says, and you're also just a massive bigot and abrasive, abusive person that would just be a nightmare to be around. Like, and
I think if he was just that, though, like if he was just purely an angry guy that just yelled and screamed all day long, then Raptor wouldn't have spent 5 hours with him. You know, I don't think we'd be sitting here talking about him. Right? There's a lot of people in this world that are like that. There's a lot of people that are just one-dimensional characters who are only angry all the time and have nothing within them except that. But I don't think we would be talking about Dustin right now if that was all that he was.
Well, no one's a caricature, right? Like, every person is complex, and I firmly believe that there's a timeline where he would alter a few of his life choices, maybe even in just a small way, and reap the benefits of it, right? But in the like, I agree. Like, a person, there is more to anyone than just, oh yes, you're a screaming bigot. But at the same time, screaming bigot is still an accurate description of the person.
Right.
And secondly, I think that there is also an element of, like, you can't. I don't think it's unfair to judge someone on the actions they do. Like, someone who chooses to, because for as much as, like, Raptor, of course, Raptor spent a long time talking to him, but that isn't the focus. Our focus should be on the person who, decided to do all the stuff that we've described, right? And so, I mean, because even Dustin, right? Like, Dustin's saying, like, to me, I don't care what you think. I don't care what you think. You're of no importance to me. But there were elements of our conversation where, for even a split second, the veneer dropped, and he did want to speak about stuff that wasn't. He said to me, I would consider Tim and the MHN guys a friend, even in light of recent events. And to me, there is something more. And when I said, oh well, what happened? And he's like, I don't want to speak about it. You can fuck off or whatever. Like, there is some elements of it being a defense mechanism, right? Like, just a shut off all access to any perceived vulnerability, and double down on being this, like, big old. Oh yes, I'm gonna. I can get through any conversation by yelling and screaming and such.
Dustin's got something to say to you, Owen.
Does he? What's he got to say to me?
Why won't Dustin do what I want him to do, says Owen. Do you have a response to that, Owen?
Well, Dustin, sorry, how do I respond? Like, Dustin, if you're listening, despite all you have said and done, I want you to be a healthy and happy person, and the things that I've said are, I think you've got to separate what I want for you is different to what I want you to do, and to an element, like, it's a sense that any human, I would say, I want to evaluate critically their actions. Like, the fact that Dustin was frustrated with the fact that he was called a bigot so many times suggests that even though he says he doesn't care, he does care, because there is some social weight on how you're perceived, and it isn't nice to have lots and lots of people think you're trash and scum, right? Like, we do. Yeah, like, there's no two ways about it. Like, with the other stuff,
We're social
people.
species at the end of the day.
Exactly. Like, he was talking about how, at the end of the stream before he booted me off, he was like, "Oh, I could live in the ocean. I could survive off kelp. I could, like, be by myself forever." And it's like, yeah, sure, but you wouldn't be happy because you'd have no one. Like, you'd have no one in interactional space to exist with. Like, part of the reason he goes back to making hell nervous, even when they clearly don't. Yeah, they're not very nice to him, I don't think, beyond sort of basic level. Like, if you took away the, oh yes, we're going to make fun of atheists, we're going to, like, laugh about the left-wing people that come and interact with us, like, what actually keeps them together? Not a lot, because they don't really get along, right? And so there needs to be more for anyone's life to be healthy, and there could be if some of this was taken. And to be fair, I think because it's an online interaction, it's hard for anyone. It takes a lot to be online and say, yeah, actually, I hold my hands up, I've interacted like a bit of a twit here. But it's not impossible. It can be done. I think there's plenty of people who have been online and done and said stuff, and then realize, hey, actually, maybe I've made a mistake here. And that is the first step, I think, right? A
Yeah,
bit of humility.
I mean, I think the
Um,
biggest thing I disagree with Dustin about in that entire conversation was probably,
screaming the
um,
N word at
well, I mean,
Raptor.
like, besides the obvious, like the very low hanging fruit that's so low it may as well be on the ground aside. Um, he, I think the one that he really got upset at was when somebody accused him of being performatively racist, and I think
He
it
said, "I
was
am racist."
I think it was a performance, Dustin, because I know you, and I know you don't go around every single day calling black people that, and I know that you don't generally hold that opinion toward black people, because I've talked to him about his opinion about black people, and I know, at least through what he has told me,
How did that
that
one come up? Hey,
um,
Dustin, what's your opinions on
what's
black
your
people?
opinion on black people, Dustin? No,
Just
we were.
survey.
It was. I think it had to do with BLM at some point. We were talking about BLM and
God.
then just general. Yeah, but like the thing is I've known Dustin for years and years at this point, and I do know that he, from what he has told me, anyways, does not just generally hold this idea that black people are inferior to white people or that they're worse, or he did get performatively angry on that stream. And he did call
Well,
Raptor that word because Raptor in particular was pissing him off really bad.
like,
And
but at the same time, very like, because that makes sense, right? But that is still a form of racism. Like, that's still like, that is still, you're willing to attack someone's racial status. Because there are lots of things you could say to insult someone, right? Like, he called me yesterday a moron. He said that I was an idiot. He says all sorts of things to me, right? He said that I'm don't know anything, right? But he chose in that conversation, because he was annoyed, to be racist. And like, for as much as when he's calm, he wouldn't have said it. Like, ultimately, that is still
oh, it's
racism.
still fucked
Like
up.
that.
It's
Yeah,
still
exactly. So
fucked
like,
up.
that is
And I
still
called him out on it, and I made fun of him for it pretty relentlessly over the course of the stream because it was a really dumb thing to do. Like,
and
trust
but
me, if
not
I.
not just that though, but like actively like a racist thing. Like, Raptor says, Ayden. I literally asked him if he believed 1350. He said yes.
See, I remember the part where you asked him if he believed 1350, but if maybe I just didn't hear him properly because there was 18 other people talking as well at the same time, but I thought that he said that he didn't know whether or not that was which, I mean, like, it's a pretty easy thing to answer. No, 1350 is a bunch of bullshit.
But
Um,
then I suppose that leads into the performance element is that you wouldn't want to admit you were wrong, right? Like, so then it's, oh yes, well of course I disagree with what you say,
you
but
guys labeled me as a big.
um,
I mean, like, and then there was the fact,
is this
like,
in? So I have to skip between both chats here. Is this in your one?
yeah, this one's in mine. Sorry. Um, there was the point where Raptor did call him a PDF file a whole bunch of times as well. And
Well,
I mean, like, now look, I get that Dustin said some really, really fucked up shit toward Raptor, and I don't stand behind a single fucking part of what Dustin did there whatsoever. I don't, and he knows that. Um, but at the same time, I don't know if that necessarily just gives you license to start throwing other things that are pretty equally bad back at that person.
equally bad. Is it equally bad?
It's
Like,
it's it's probably the
I
worst
think
thing you
there's
can be accused of in this society. It's
like
probably
this
the
is a.
single
I mean,
worst thing that you can be accused. No, I mean, like, you'll get horrifically murdered in prison if it's even suspected that you are one of those people. It's one of the worst possible things that you could be accused of being.
sure. I don't think it was the case that the stuff that Dustin was being called was completely detached from. I mean, I'm sure there was a bit of maybe hyperbole with the PDF stuff, shall we say. But at the same time, Dustin did say some. I mean, other than the racism stuff, like Dustin also said some other very very questionable stuff about Trump for one. I mean, the constant dismissal of the Epstein stuff, all the section, the fact that literally you yourself, right, have demonstrated that dozens of people have come out against Trump and said, yeah, this person has sexually assaulted me, has raped me, and such, right? Like,
Yeah, we were
it's
talking to him about that on that stream.
even on one of your streams. I remember watching. I mean, admittedly, it was via was it? It was either Raptor or Q, but they restreamed your stream where Dustin like crashes out completely, right? Like I don't. It's you and a bunch of other people that I'm not as familiar with, but like it's you and a group with Dustin, and Dustin is screaming because you're pointing out that like Trump is basically like has hundreds of things against him at this point, right? And so there's that. There's the constant like just doesn't care about the fact that Trump has very clearly engaged in some very shady actions over his years. There's the literal. I mean, the story he told about the girls' bathroom was pretty alarming to just have him say. The just general creepiness, the clear like lack of boundaries. I mean, as oh, that's in your chat.
Yeah, he
Morngo
had
says, "I'm sorry, but if you are defending a paedophile, then you probably are one either." I mean, I don't. I mean, admittedly, I don't. I'm not sure. I do agree with the last part of that, but there is like there's clearly if you're defending that's like horrible, horrible stuff,
I mean,
then
yeah, I would
go ahead.
say
Sorry.
that there were loads of people that defended what was going on within the Catholic Church for a long time because they had
And that
very
wasn't
strong
okay either.
ties and associations. And I agree, but a lot of the reasoning for why those people defended the Catholic Church wasn't because of that particular stuff that was going on or because they were PDF files. It was because they had very strong connections and associations with the Catholic Church.
Yeah,
Right?
like in group
So
loyalty, right? Like there is that, there is that affinity. If it's something that it is, especially with religion, right? Like if your religion is, if you've grown up with the church as like your background to your life and such, and then suddenly there's an attack sort of made on the institution, it can be hard to separate it, right? But firstly, I think that's the importance of sort of deconstructing unjust hierarchies and such, and sort of having that critical mind. And secondly, I think that in Dustin's case, like some of the stuff that's been said, I think is beyond because it's like it's not as though he's just defending Trump and such. Like it's the nature of how he defends it. It's the complete ambivalence to the very clear stuff that he's presented. He'll demand like he demanded. Oh yes, prove this is going on, and he's shown proof, and he's just screaming and yelling, doesn't care. It's the stuff he says about his own life. It's the fact that he said he said he got arrested for rape. He said that he's been to prison. Like there's all sorts of like red
all
flags
right, ladies and
that
gentlemen, I just want to say, after mounting public pressure on all sides, I no longer consider Dustin Buck to be my. No, I'm just joking. Um, he's look. I understand why you guys are not his friend. I get it. I have no predilections or qualms whatsoever as to why you do not consider him to be your friend, and I understand why you're confused about why I consider him to be my friend. Um, like I said, it goes a lot deeper than just like a conversation that happened over the internet or something like that. It's a person I've known for a long time,
you mind
and
me asking how long you've known? Do you mind me asking how long you've known him?
yeah, not a problem. I've known him. I think we first met in 2022. It was either
Okay, so
late
a good few years
2021
then.
or early 2022. Yeah, no, I've known him for a long time at this point. And we initially met actually because he was involved with a person that I no longer speak with anymore, but he was a good friend of mine at the time. He got into a dispute with him, and I was very, very vehemently against Dustin for a long time. Like, we got into a lot of very, very ugly fucking arguments. Um, but it really was a process over several conversations, over several months, that I kind of actually got to talk to Dustin instead of buck around and find out, so to speak. And it's when you get to talk to him and kind of get to know who he is a little bit and kind of get to see that side of him that he becomes a little bit more amenable, I guess would be one of the terms that I would kind of float out there a little bit. But I get it. I understand why you guys have the opinions that you do about him, and I hope that you guys don't look at me any less as a result of me having him as one of my friends. But he is. He's one of my friends, and I will stand by that.
Do you mind me asking? And you have to answer. Are you yeah, like are you white?
All right, so have a good one, everybody. It was good being on the show. No, I'm just joking. I am white. Yes, I am Caucasian.
Do you think that not to shame, of course, not to probe, but do you think that that might have an influence on why Dustin is more able to maybe eventually warm to yourself,
I
whereas to people like Raptor and myself and Q and some of the other people?
I wouldn't deny it. I mean, it would be kind of silly of me to act like that's just a complete non-factor whatsoever. It is, of course, going to be easier for me as somebody that's never actually had to directly deal with that kind of prejudice at any point in my life to kind of look past that. I could definitely see that, but I just hope that you guys know that although I consider him my friend, that doesn't mean that I give him a pass when it comes to any of those behaviors that he does, because I don't. I never
Yeah,
have.
I've heard you been very critical of him. Like I say, that stream that I mean, the one prior to obviously the one that he did on his own channel, right? Um, but the one he did on your channel, which by the way, actually, I wouldn't mind speaking to your non-Dustin guests. There's some interesting folk on there. But the one where like I think it just ends because like Dustin's just screaming and yelling and stuff. Um, like to me a level of sorry, I lost my train of thought here a little bit. The like the stuff that because of course like yeah, someone can sit and get to know someone and I have no doubt that when you're actually speaking to someone for a long enough period of time like you get to know them. There's always a human being behind someone's political ideas and such. But at the same time, and it's not to say, oh yes, you'll be condemned forever, Ayden, for being friends with this person. I suppose there is some, Mongo says in your chat. I can't look past as a woman. I don't tolerate rapists. I can't look past the rape arrest. In this country, you don't get arrested for being accused of rape unless there is some real credible evidence.
Yeah, that was the first time I heard anything about any of that whatsoever. Now, I am going to have to ask him about that at some point in time.
You see what I mean, right? Because I absolutely, because that's not. I mean, I know he didn't directly call me the N word, but it's not the first time that I've been called that online or had it like said in my presence and stuff, right? Like, and I absolutely like. Whilst I will still stand by, it is still 100% a form of racism and makes a person on that racist sort of spectrum to have that, right? Like, I 100% get the idea that you would performatively, if you have the mindset of someone like Dustin, say something like that, right? But most people don't just splurge out like so many things about that, being arrested for rape. Like that's the sort of thing which just is a whole other level. And like prison time, like I think from the sounds of it, it was for possession of drugs or something, which I think is a nonsense reason. Right? I don't care about that. But
Yeah, I think
there's
mushrooms or something like
yeah,
that.
like nonsense. Like you're not gonna get me saying, oh yes, there's oh yes, you're in prison, therefore you're evil and bad. Like, of course not. But
Right, right.
given all the stuff around it, I think there is like I don't know, like for me, and again, we're different people. Um, there's there's something a bit uneasy that I think makes it a bit different, and I suppose
So,
as well, like having this person in your spaces. Um, I don't know, like it's there's different levels of interactional risk, I think, for different people,
oh, for
which
sure.
I,
And
which I guess would be something to raise.
I guess it's not the same at all as far as like being directly analogous to each other. I think that you could maybe make a vague connection insofar as like similar circumstances, but while I'm not black, and while I certainly can't understand what it would be like to be called something like that and have it have the full weight behind it that it would in that context, I do understand what it is like to be in destitute poverty because I grew up in a really bad situation for a long time, and I had a very rough and tumble childhood, and those are two
Sorry to hear
things
that.
that it is what it is. I can agree to well, agree is the wrong term. I can relate very strongly to Dustin in a lot of aspects because for a lot of my life I didn't channel my anger in the same avenues as Dustin. A lot of my anger went toward things like religion, um, and politics rather than race. But that anger that Dustin has, that rage that he has within him, I understand that very, very much because that rage and frustration that comes with destitute poverty, the feeling that you're never going to get out of it, the feeling like you're in this never ending cycle that is just never going to be broken, the ways that that changes your mind and changes your perception of the world around you, all of that are things that I can very strongly relate to Dustin about as well. I'd say even more so than the other qualities of him that I've described. And I get it. Like, it's like what you said. There are people that are living in destitution that aren't racist bigots. I get it. I understand that. But I I'm not trying to excuse his behavior. I am just trying to say that that does markedly change a person when they
Of
are put under
course.
those straits and
Um,
circumstances.
yeah, I think everyone, people, I think all of us have had empathy with his situation and with his life and stuff, and I've also all had similar situations at various points. I mean, I've never been homeless, thankfully, but it's not hardly like a billionaire, right? So it's not
Right.
as though I'm not like we're all sort of on the capitalist grinds trying to make our way through life and such, right? But I also think that, Mongo again, you also don't really disclose that you were arrested for rape unless you are in some way proud of it. And Raptor says, and continuing to make rape jokes, especially at someone he says he wants to knock out. Um, like I think that there is some element of like for as much as it's important to recognize a person's hardships and stuff, there is also, I don't want to sound like right wing, but that personal responsibility, almost like that a sense of, okay, well, actually, yes, bad things have happened in your life, but now you are a person with the autonomy to be better. To think, okay, bad things happen to me, and now I will do my best to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Because
Yeah.
like that, like I absolutely think that it's a disgrace that Dustin is homeless and has to rely on staying in his car and such, and
And
has had all
well,
these things
works as
happen.
hard as he
But
does as well. It's not even like he just sits around all day and doesn't do anything with himself. He's pouring the vast majority of his time into working his ass off, and he has little to nothing to actually show for it. And what I've been trying to do in my interactions with Dustin, I've been trying to show him that the reason why he works so hard and doesn't have anything to show for it isn't because of trans people. It isn't because of immigrants. It isn't because of all of these social issues that are going on. It's because of the economic downturn that your country has been going into. And
what does he normally
unfortunately,
say in response to you?
um it usually ends up turning into a giant whataboutism argument, but I have made progress, incremental though it is. I have kind of made him realize bit by bit, in my opinion, that it isn't just this myopic situation where it's this specific group of people. Now, I will give him this: it's refreshing that he doesn't think that it's the what's the best way of putting it? The Jays. He doesn't think it's them that are running everything.
Whoopsie
So
doo!
that's I
I'm very
know,
glad.
I know, right? But
What 1 out of 1,000? Well done,
one out of
Dustin.
1,000. There you go. Everybody, can we please get a round of applause for Dustin in the side chat? No, but seriously, Dustin is a very, very interesting person to me. He is somebody that I fundamentally disagree with on the vast majority of talking points that I have with him. But I think the fact that he still has enough respect for me to be able to continuously, and that's another important thing as well. It's easy for me to say all of these things about Dustin because Dustin, by his own admission, has a certain level of respect for me. He does not have that level of respect for you. He does not have that level of respect for Raptor. He does not have that level of respect for other people. So I understand that it's easier for me to make all of these statements regarding Dustin than it is for people like you. But I do hope that at least on a certain level, you may not perfectly like relate or understand why I still consider him my friend, but you can at least kind of get the general outline of what I'm talking about right now.
I can get the outline. I mean, I can't say I agree, and
I know.
I, I don't mean that in a sense of yes, Dustin, to put him in a bin or whatever. But like at the same time, like I don't know. I feel like yeah, maybe we are going to have to just sort of I couldn't imagine wanting to sustain something for so long that yeah, when someone treats a person in the manner that he does. But it's a difference, as you say. Different things have happened in your where with like it's a tricky one because it's like the person that doesn't. So I'm losing my train of thought here. I've
No,
been
no, no,
speaking
no,
for too
no, no,
long.
you're good. Yeah, like one of the reasons why I have him on my show is because I find that it's important that people of other worldviews and other persuasions have an ability to be able to come on and make their worldview known.
See, I agree with that. Like, I do agree with that, but at the same time, there's got to be like a base level, actually, like actual. Okay, you have fundamental respect for other human beings, and I think that he doesn't. Like, for as much as obviously it's your show. You have the choice to put on who you want and such, right? But in my mind, it's such a low, like you said earlier, it's such a low bar. It's such a low bar, and he can't get over it. Like, and I mean, for as much as maybe he's had lots of shows where he's not with you, like, meaning no offense here, like you and your friends are, I mean, you're white for one, but also
Right.
like, the people like, for instance, obviously, I mean, he wasn't like, he was racist, but he wasn't directly racist to me. He was directly racist to Raptor. Q was there. Sable was Sable there. Who else was there? Yeah, I've using misogynistic language, anti-LGBTQ language. Like, there's people who wouldn't want to stay in the same spaces of communication that he's in, unless it was like a big group. Like, for as much, obviously, like we've all been sort of speaking to Dustin recently, right? But part of it is like you're going in knowing that he's going to say awful stuff, and you're sort of wanting to push. Like, because of me, like I would have, had he not booted me off the call, and had it also not also been like 2 a.m. or something, I would have tried to muscle through and speak more, because I genuinely was happy to sit and speak through some of the stuff. I mean, I know he has that sort of reaction of like, oh yeah, I'm going to shut down, I'm not going to respond and such, but I would have tried to push through because there is a person underneath all that stuff. However, at the same time, like, I don't think there is something wrong with, as people are like, sort of going and such, being critical of a person like that and being able to say, okay, this person, if you keep them in your space and such, then there's
I
going to be
get it.
some element to it, right?
I mean,
Like,
there's an aspect of it. I don't know what your like ideological persuasion is, but I consider myself to be a humanist personally. And part of my beliefs in humanism is that how we treat some of the worst within our society, how we treat some of the worst people as far as the bigots and people that are hateful, and even if they're just completely irrationally hateful, I think how we treat some of those people are indicative of how our society in general is running and the health of our society. And I think that if we just completely ignore and castigate and throw those people away and just shove them to the margins of society, that we are essentially condemning those people to forever have that kind of mindset.
Well, like on the one hand, I do see what you're saying there, but on the other, without wanting to be really cruel, like why? Firstly, why should everyone else in society have to tolerate just a person that makes no
Oh, they
attempts
don't.
to ever? But then at the same time, like if they're in, like the social spaces, that people are. Sorry, I got a message. The social spaces that people are in, like if they have, I mean, when Dustin's there, like it's just vitriol and nastiness, right? Like it's BS, but it's also something which exists in a social space. So if it's not like if it's tolerated tacitly, there's that lack of tolerance for people who for rhetoric targets. Like if you have someone screaming racial slurs and it's not like dealt with, you've got that as like a permitted form of conduct. And I think to an extent, for as much as you want to give people the chance to get better and to join society, there's also a sense of, if people let this die off, like I don't mean that like literally like, oh yes, dead. I mean like, if it's sort of kept away, the normative elements of society don't tolerate that racism. Like, I mean, look at the history of America and Britain as well. You only have to go back to the very recent past to find racial slurs as just common practice in speech. Like commonly racist jokes. Barely any black people in like many mainstream spaces, and now because that isn't tolerated as much anymore, things are much better. And so, for as much as I think it's important to try and reach people like Dustin, like, there's also a sense of if Dustin is going to, just be this vitriolic, awful person all the time, like, then sure, you can say it's separate from the rest of society and scream and moan about why people have let you down or whatever, and ultimately, like, you're gonna have to realize that unless you address what everyone is saying to you, there's not going to be any change. I mean, I know he'll say like, "Yes, I don't care," or "F you, Owen," or whatever. But like, I don't. I think there's that sort of difficulty in that being the case. So I mean, I am enjoying this, Ayden, but my voice is very slowly starting to squeak and go and stuff.
No, you're good.
I'm happy to talk for a bit longer, but I may have to end call this at some point.
Yeah,
soon.
you're good. I'll probably
what were
be
you saying,
opening
sorry?
up. I'll probably be opening up my room here, once you take your leave for a little bit to give people the opportunity to come on.
Oh, okay. Well, that's. I mean, I wouldn't mind actually, but it'd be interesting to speak to. Well, actually, no. Maybe another time. Actually, yeah, it'd be interesting to. Shut up, Raptor Jew. But I mean, you see what I mean, right? I mean, you were saying earlier that he doesn't. He's not
Look.
anti-Semitic, and I mean.
Wait. Look. I said that he didn't think that they were the ones that caused everything. I never said that he was. No, but he also said in the side chat, your real question here, Owen, is what should the consequences be for Dustin holding opinions that I disagree with? Would you have any response to that, Owen?
So say it again. Sorry.
Dustin said, your real question here, Owen. I didn't know if you realized this, Owen. You were asking a fake question. This is your real question. Your real question here, Owen, is what should the consequences be for Dustin holding opinions that I disagree with?
Dustin holding opinions that you disagree with. Yeah, no, it's a.
I think I.
It's an interesting one
because.
Wait, sorry, say that. Sorry, my mind is going blank. I've also. Let me just ping.
Okay. Your real question here, Owen, is what should the consequences be for Dustin holding opinions that you disagree with?
Well, obviously, marched off to the death camps. I think.
Obviously.
No, it's. I think that you've got a person. So I'm just Raptor has asked to join us. So I'm just going to quickly let him come in for the last little bit.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
That should be, yeah.
I
Ooh,
gotta go,
scary.
guys. I'm sorry.
No, it's like it's an interesting one, right? Because I think that we lose some of the weight of what the opinion is when like it's not as though the opinion is a mundane one. It's something that's fundamentally like just grotesque, right? And so I think socially there ought to be like in if we're acting that idea, there should be some, like as he's finding out, like he can't interact with people online without sort of these being called all these things. I mean, obviously you're his friend and such, but I mean, if I'm being super honest, I think there should be some like. I mean, you say you've not heard about the rape stuff, but like there should be some like I don't know, criticality almost, and I get that you do, and
Oh, I
you
do.
have
No, I
you
am
have called him out and
critical.
such. Yeah, you are, um, but no, it's so I just having all conversations all at once and such, right?
No, I'm just trying to fill in the
Um,
dead air.
my mind's just going to mush up. I've been talking for too long.
No worries, my friend. No worries.
But no, like it's like because for as much as challenging, you say you're his friend and stuff, and I think that he obviously places value in that friendship, and it's enough of a friendship to I don't know, like like Rat wanting to be. Well, actually, I will just say it. Like,
Yeah,
if
just go
maybe
and
if
say
you,
it.
it may, maybe if you said like, well, actually, Dustin, some of these things are a bit too much for me to consider. Continuing as the way we've been going, right? Like maybe if you said like, oh well, actually, I want to take a bit of space because you've said some really objectionable things, and I want to maybe pause for a little bit. Like, and I'm not saying you must do that. I'm not saying you have to do that, but if a person like is in a space and they feel they can get away with just saying like just abhorrent stuff like because he obviously Justin doesn't consider us worthy of respect like myself Raptor anyone but he doesn't expect that he's gonna like every interaction with us is just nonsense. Here's Raptor now.
Hey.
Hello
Oh, you guys didn't.
Raptor.
You didn't. You didn't need to let me in. You could just waited. I'm just
All right,
chilling.
awesome, we're right in a second then
Get
but
back there, Raptor.
no it's like the idea that we're sorry we're gonna have to call this in a second because my mind is I'm barely
You're
even
good.
forming
You're good. You're
sentences
good.
now. Like we aren't in the like the space Dustin considers our space. His we aren't in a bit that he considers his space, right?
Right.
So he doesn't care, but you're someone that he would put in his sort of normative spaces. So he does hold more value in your interaction, which would put you in a place to say, okay, I don't consider these behaviors something that I'd want to, it's not just something we can just look past. And then that might make him think, okay, maybe I can't just run my mouth every second and act a certain way.
Possibly.
But it's I think there's also like a degree of he's comfortable. Well, not comfortable because he lives in a car and all the other stuff, right? But he is comfortable in his social interactions because other than vitriolic screaming, it's moaning about the left and atheists with making Elle nervous, and it's on your chat talking about stuff, right? Like, so there's a lot of stuff which I think is a bit like comfortable. I'm gonna have to maybe go off live in a second because I'm just
no
speaking
problem.
like I've lost my train of thought now.
No. Yeah, I think you're being a bit more coherent than you might be giving yourself credit for. Look, I will say.
That's very kind, Ayden.
I will say that I understand your concerns. I understand Raptor's concerns, and I do want you guys to know that although I consider him to be my friend, that does not mean by any stretch of the imagination I will, either in the past or now or in the future, give him a pass on any of those behaviors. Because I don't. I never endeavor on just letting him slip by those things unabated. I'd have to give some thought as to what you said about asking him about those things. because my only concern is that I want Dustin, if he does come to this conclusion about, if he does change his mind about these things, I want it to be something that he has done himself, because unfortunately I feel like if people, Dustin being a pretty unlikely candidate for this to happen to in the first place, but I feel like if people change their ideas because they feel a certain pressure to change them around in a certain way, I feel like that only kind of gets the seed halfway planted, because it's not until they arrive at the idea that these ideas are legitimate and they are true and they are best implemented in this world. I think they have to arrive to that themselves in order for the idea to truly take root in somebody's mind, right? So I would be worried that if I applied pressure to him, I got him to change that behavior, and he only changed those behaviors due to the pressure of me no longer being his friend, that wouldn't actually change his mind, and if anything, might even cause him to be more resentful toward that group of people, because now he kind of has this sense that, oh, well, this group of people forced Ayden into doing these things now, you know? I do want Dustin's mind to be changed, but I want Dustin's mind to be changed because he came to those ideas and conclusions. I hope you understand.
I mean, like, I get what you're saying, but I mean, firstly, like, it might just not. Like, I
It
mean,
might. No, it
there's
might.
no, there's no guarantee that just sort of every person's gonna escape their racist views, right? Like, someone
Right.
might just be racist, and then it's almost a case. And like, there's also the idea that for as much as the shock might make him like just keep being racist, it might also be so much of a shock that it's like, wow, okay, I'm gonna lose like one of my only friends basically if I don't actually start changing how I behave with people and such, right? And there's also, you know, Dustin ultimately is a human being that's responsible for his own actions. Like, for as much as we want to like, have let fewer racists in society, if someone chooses, I'm gonna just say really abhorrent stuff and behave in a manner which is just abrasive to the rest of society, let them, and watch as they lose contact with anyone that wants to be around them. Like, ultimately, there's a wider audience than just Dustin that I think is worth to consider as well. But no, I will sort of I'll curb the live portion of this for now. Thank you so much, Ayden, for coming on and having a chat. Quite a bit of it was really interesting, and even talking for an hour about a person that I've only known for a very brief period of time has been quite interesting.
Yeah.
But
Thank you for having
if
me on. I
you're
really appreciate
not
you
at
giving
all,
me the
not at all.
platform.
Not at all. And like I say, at some point, perhaps we'll talk politics of a non-Dustin manner to go more into that stuff. Are you going live on your own channel now, Ayden? Are you?
Yeah,
making-
so I'm live at the moment on my channel, and I will. Do you mind if I shout my channel out?
Yeah, of course. Go for it.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm Ayden Linden 9661 over on YouTube. I wish it was 6661, but unfortunately we can't always get what we want.
Yeah, making hell nervous would get you then. So.
Ayden Linden 9661. I've got the restream link over on my side chat there. People are welcome to jump on the restream and have a chat with me. Let me just make sure that is visible, because every once in a while YouTube likes to do this fun thing where it doesn't actually post the link. No, it does seem to be out there. So yeah, you guys are welcome to come on to my chat and have some conversations about what we talked about today or something else completely different. I'm probably going to be around for maybe another half an hour at this point, but thank you again, Owen. Seriously, this was a really good conversation. Really enjoyed it, and I bid thee a good day and take care.
Take care. All.